Hello, everyone, and welcome to part 3 of my Mormon Stories Podcast interview with Marc Oslund. I'm John DeLynn, and I am just loving, we're about 9 hours into this epic interview with Marc. For those who have not listened to parts 1 and 2, you will want to listen to parts 1 and 2. In part 1, we talk about Marc growing up in LA, becoming an all-star, all-American athlete in baseball and football, and then how he gives up a Major League Baseball contract 3 different times to both, convert to the Mormon Church and go on a mission and attend BYU. And kind of we answer the question of how and why would a smart, successful kid join Mormonism in the modern era. So it's a fascinating interview. We talk about what it did to his family relationships. We talk about what it did to his mental health, put him on this hamster wheel of worthiness that was not good for him. And of course, without informed consent, without him being told a lot of things, caused him to make a lot of life-altering decisions that he definitely would not have made, probably without all the information. Although love can make people do really strange things. Anyway, part 1 was super epic. Part 2 was kind of post-baseball career after he had gotten injured and stopped playing baseball and gave up his ambitions to become a Major League Baseball player. And by the way, he played against many of the greats who are known and super famous today in the California area. Part 2 was all about his decision to become a seminary teacher, how he went to work for CES full-time, how he did that as a convert, as someone who didn't grow up going to seminary, how it really was challenging for him to fit into the culture, but how he became a great teacher, but how he had many culture clashes with kind of the passive-aggressive Mormon/CES culture that can be fatal for so many, metaphorically fatal, at least I'm saying. We talked about, him serving as a seminary teacher in Utah County, in American Fork, and in Pleasant Grove, and one other middle school, and how he started becoming a progressive seminary teacher. And so, with all the Kate Kelly, Jeremy Runnels, John DeLynn, Gospel Topics Essays stuff, what it was like to be a seminary teacher during that time, how the church did not and did try and train and prepare their seminary teachers. And then as he was going through a metamorphosis of his own faith, he becomes kind of a Terryl and Fiona Givens Mormon as a seminary teacher, which culminates in him showing Queer Eye for the straight guy to some of his seminary students and getting a warning for that. He actually got 2 warnings. One was for trumped up charges by jealous peers, according to the story that we heard, and it seems pretty credible. And then the second one was for being a little bit edgy, which I think is kind of gangster. It's a little bit, that's probably not the right word. I'll retract that. Cool. That's kind of cool to think about a Mormon seminary teacher in Utah County showing Queer Eye for the straight guy to his seminary students at which high school was it?
It was at Timpanogos High.
At Timpanogos High.
Yep.
Anyway, so we've done 8 or 9 hours so far. What we have left is one final segment where we're going to talk about kind of the unraveling of his faith as a Mormon seminary teacher in Utah County, what that's like, how it was handled, how he handled it, what that's like on his mental health, on his family, on his relationships. And then we're going to talk about what it's like for a seminary teacher who loses their faith to try and figure out what they're going to do, given all the risks and the problems associated with giving your life to a career that kind of leaves you without many options afterwards. And then we're going to talk about what that's been like, and then where he and his wife and his son are now in their life. So without any further ado, Marc Oslund, welcome back to Mormon Stories.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me. And yeah, I'm so grateful that this part, like yesterday, what we were talking about, and then today, these are like the key for me. Like so much changes right around between, late 2017 to 2019. I mean, I'm go from it feels like I do a 180, and showing queer I was a part of that. And just reflecting, I went home yesterday and I was reflecting on, like, I want to convey clearly where I was. You mentioned like being a Terryl and Fiona Givens Mormon. That's exactly who I was. I believed. Like I was still having the questions, the doubts, but to be honest, like I was keeping them inside. So what I'm sharing, especially last episode, was more that internal voice that I silenced and I had to keep down. The voice that I was perpetuating to students was, it was one of, I don't know about this, I don't like this, I don't agree with this, but it was also, hey, we should stay faithful, we should still be Mormon, being Mormon's good, being Mormon has benefits. And so I wanted that clear that up until this point, I was still definitely trying to make it work and still thinking it could and should work. So that's key for me, that I was still like a believer, at least in basic principles, like Jesus coming down and being empathetic towards people. And that was the main mission, and God knowing all of his kids and God loving all of his kids. But the real thing for me was prophets, specifically Russell Nelson, coming up and making changes to culture. Elder Bednar saying, hey, Utah culture is not right. The people in Africa that are just getting the simple things, they got it right. Elder Ballard saying, teach clearly, don't deny, don't doubt. These were things that were like fundamental for me, thinking I'm following prophets in pushing the church to where I think it should be. And so that whole vision was key, as well as the thought of my students were the ones who were really driving me to be this way. We're having conversations in seminary about, the exodus of people. We talked about this, about never mentioning a CES letter by name, but the tactics of the CES letter, of big listing and showing all of the problems and not focusing on faith and not doubting your doubts. And so we talked about this, and my students are sharing it. And the Pew research that Patrick Mason talked about in his recent fireside, that came out when I was teaching. And I presented that in class. I said, tell me about this, students. And I'm like, does this fit you? 85% said, yes, I'm wondering why I want to be religious moving forward. I'm asking them questions and they're not agreeing with what the church is doing. And so for me, I'm saying, how do we reach these kids, not just to help them, but to save the church? I feel like I'm being altruistic in terms of my protection of the church. And so I in order to do that, I have to kind of go out and push and be a little bit further than maybe what other seminary teachers have done. And listening to Stephen Harper, I finally figured out his name, right?
Okay, so tell us who that is again.
Stephen Harper, a church historian. He was the main one in charge of writing the book Saints. He came and presented the entire script to us and talked about what that's going to be and why we're doing it and how we need to be more transparent. And so he does every week for an entire summer training for us at Utah Valley, and telling us to kind of, hey, this is what's going on. We're seeing this.
I wish I could have a recording of that training.
Yeah, me too. I used to have access, but they revoke your access when they take away your church email. So
they did record that training?
Oh yeah, for sure. That's in there. Paul Reeves' training was in there. I re-listened to that. I mean, we have a gold mine of stuff in 2018 summer and then 2019 with Terryl and Fiona Givens. So you can see seminary wanting to take baby steps, and it's feeding my soul as a millennial who's watching his friends walk away, his sibling walk away, his dad walk away. And I'm saying, this is the way. My students say it's the way. My friends say this is the way. And then seminary says, this isn't doctrine. I wouldn't teach this, basically. And so this is the tension I'm having.
But it's also, Terryl and Fiona Givens are at the Maxwell Institute.
Yes.
It's not like they're just kind of like rogue.
Yes.
And people like Stephen Harper and Paul Reeve, they're sent to you by the church, and they're the ones that wrote Saints and the essays. And so, I mean, like, that was one of the weird realizations during part 2, yep. when you shared this idea that they're sending you this progressive, Mormon training and this sort of new Mormon history training, but they're also telling you don't have to believe it so that it can help the people that it needs to help, but then not disturb the people that it doesn't need to disturb, and how kind of confusing that, and it shows that the church probably internally is not, which is just human. It's
yep.
normal. You're not going to have everyone on the same page or agreeing. So it probably shows a lot of inner turmoil that the church itself is experiencing.
100%. And so the confusion that's perpetuated on me, I'm like, well, what do you want me to do? Like, you're telling me this thing and then telling me not this thing. And then Russell Nelson saying, hey, listen to God and get revelation. And so I'm trying to do that.
And Ballard is saying, learn every, know the essays.
Exactly.
Backwards and forwards.
Yeah,
like
Holland saying there's room for everybody in the choir, and Uchtdorf saying, don't teach with fear. And so I taught a whole Living Prophets class. I chose this topic in Pleasant Grove. I taught adult religion to people that were, I don't think we had people younger than, we had a couple people younger than 60, but it was for 60 to 80 year olds. And I'm teaching the words of living prophets and how they are basically canceling out the words of McConkie and Kimball and Joseph Fielding Smith. And these sweet people are frustrated. They're like, but I'm like, just trust me on this. And at the end of every lesson, we get to the point, so what do we do with this? And the point is, we should feel free. Don't be mean to your kids. Don't beat your kids up if they walk away. Be understanding, be kind. If there's gay people, love them. And so these sweet older people in Pleasant Grove became more like, yeah, that's true. And I'm watching the fruit of this. I mean, I'm seeing my students who, I'm having kids reach out to me via Instagram. Our seminary Instagram accounts that were unofficial had thousands of followers, and we're reaching out, and kids are just like, they're messaging me personally, and they're contacting me about their questions, their doubts, about how their family's treating them, about how their questions about conference. Like, there's so many of these issues, and I'm trying to be this stopgap. And I feel like I'm the only one. And yes, Brother Oslund, you're not supposed to message students, but hey, also, can you message a student and have them come because we haven't seen them for a while? So I'm getting so many mixed messages this is the only intent I had at the time. And the intent was to help kids make Mormonism work so that they wouldn't be beat up, so they wouldn't feel miserable, so they wouldn't feel anxious. And I was doing that in all different forms, adult religion, teenagers, whatever, everyone.
And I was talking to someone just the other day who's part of the U.S. military, and he was saying to me they kind of take pride in internal critics or internal criticism because they've come to realize that, and I'm sure there are limits to this, and I'm sure that there are other people that would disagree, but what he was telling me as a member of the U.S. Navy is that they welcome criticism and feedback because they want to be excellent. Yeah. But it's a less mature organization that just literally has no mechanism for internal feedback or correction. Yep. And I think that comes from being a young church, a new church, a high demand religion. And I think Mormonism just to this day, in this example of you telling all these people in the adult religions class that they don't have to worry about what the old prophets have said. Now the new prophets trump the old prophets. That's true, but I think our church would prefer people to trust the new prophets without ever discussing the fact that the old prophets got it right. Yep. So the church they want everyone to just kind of whatever the current prophet is saying, follow that, and don't ever draw that connection that past prophets got it wrong. Yep. Because that that kind of threatens the authority of current prophets to undermine the authority of past prophets.
100%, which is exactly what happened for me. As I continue to look at this, I'm like, well, how many other things have they gotten wrong? Yeah. Which is why now I'm at the point, and I began teaching, right, with the Queer Eye thing. Hey, I think they're a little worried about this, and they probably aren't going to admit it because it means all these other things. Yeah. And so that's exactly what happened. And I think being a convert was a major downfall of mine, where I didn't have ties to Kimball. Thomas Monson was the only prophet I knew until Nelson. Hinckley died a month after I joined the church, so I never knew Hinckley. And so all of these ties, I'm like, I don't care. I'll throw McConkie under the bus. What does he mean to me? Mm-hmm. If he's hurting kids now in 2019, 2018, I'm going to make sure I do things to, help them. And then Benson, I'll use Benson. I'll say, look, Benson says in the 14 fundamentals, a living prophet is more important than a dead prophet. So there's my backing. And I think that was the irony of what I was doing, which I was using the words of prophets, living prophets, I think in a way that was uncomfortable for seminary. They just wanted me to use the living prophets to hold up and prop up the church and not use it to actually call out the church.
Yeah. Yeah. And what I experienced with my stake president, he didn't really care what I believed. He didn't care that my beliefs were orthodox as much. He just didn't want me to talk about it.
Yep.
That's the agreement in Mormonism is you can evolve in your beliefs, just don't talk about it. Don't say or do anything that would cause anyone else, that would cause the virus to spread. Like, I think it's so beautiful, this pandemic. The pandemic's awful, but it's a great metaphor because truth is a virus. Yep. And it's a bad metaphor because truth is actually like gold. Yeah, truth is a precious gem, but truth acts like a virus. Once one person starts noticing it and sharing it, it spreads. And when truth spreads, like you said last part, testimonies built on sand will crumble.
Yeah. And that's it. And that's the irony where I'm trying to prop up Jesus, like Jesus. Literally, I think the most apt metaphor for what happened in seminary, especially at that time, is I take the prophets off the wall and I put up Jesus. And then eventually they tell me to take Jesus off and put the prophets up.
Yeah.
And to me, I think that just perfectly describes what Mormonism is doing, where I'm saying, no, you're building on a foundation of modern prophets who are wrong. We just know that they're wrong. It's okay to say they're wrong. And then you're building on the 1950s nuclear American family. Those things are not sustainable. And Jesus, I think we can have problems with Jesus about him being a foundation, but Jesus is going to be a better foundation for a religion than those two other things.
I think if I'm giving you a tiny bit of like feedback, not feedback, let's just say pushback, trying to like think of questions for my audience. I think there's a general understood idea of don't get ahead of the brethren.
For sure.
That, like clearly you or Bill Reel or Jenna Spangler or Natasha Helfer or me, we were on the right track, but we got ahead of the brethren.
Yep.
And the brethren don't like to be kind of shown up. And so what would you say to that feedback? You're like, you're an employee of the church. You probably at some sense know there's risk here. And what you were clearly doing was, as a church employee, doing what shouldn't be done, which is getting ahead of the brethren and acting a little bit rogue. Yeah. I'm guessing you had some instinct that you were doing that and that it could end badly for you. And that it might be, and there are probably other people who are still in CES or just in the church who realize that you don't get ahead of the brethren and who just wait and are more patient until the brethren lead out. And then you say all the same things you're saying and all the same things you're doing. You just do it after the brethren have led.
For sure. And I think,
which is gross.
Yeah.
It's gross.
It really is. Because that's the thing, right? Where I absolutely agree. Like, looking back, I totally disagree with the church and how they treated me, seminary and how they treated me. But from their warped perspective, they were doing what was best. And so I absolutely think I was getting ahead, and I knew that I was getting ahead. But I saw the trajectory and I see where they're going. And I see, in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, the church is going to be, or seminary is going to be where I was, and it's going to be better for everyone. So my desire to do that was to protect kids. I just saw so much unnecessary hurt.
Yeah.
And I felt very, 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 so I know that you were huge on protecting LGBTQ people, and that was a big, big, big catalyst.
And divorces and broken families.
Yep. And mine was teenagers.
Yeah.
Mine was seeing the harm.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I refuse to let the church hurt these kids who I adore, who I just absolutely think the world of, and I still think the world of, and who are coming to me saying, I'm doing everything right, and why am I so anxious? I'm doing everything right, and I don't want to go on a mission. I'm doing everything right, and my parents are still mean to me, blah, 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 blah. And I would do anything. I was willing to put myself on the line to protect teenagers. So the feedback's correct 100%. And I knew what I was doing, but it was worth the risk because I knew that I was doing what I could to save lives. When kids are reaching out to me with an Instagram saying, hey, I'm feeling suicidal, I could tell them, sorry, I'm not allowed to message you, or I could message them and then, contact Safe UT and make sure that they get help. And to me, I figured, well, the choice is clear. I will bite the bullet. I'll get in trouble.
And frankly, the only way to be an LGBT ally is to be an LGBT ally.
Yep.
And there's no, it's hard to do that without getting ahead of the brethren because they're still not quite there yet.
That's exactly right. And so when people are like, I love LGBTQ people, I'm like, cool. Have you been in trouble yet with the church? I'm like, no. Okay. I don't know if you're yet where you need to be.
Yeah.
And so like, for example, I would teach, DNC 109 was our temple lesson. And we talked all about, as clearly as I could, about the temple robes. The church comes out with the video. And I'm like, here's the video. What questions do you have? Here's the covenants you're going to make as spelled out by Brigham Young. This is what's going to go on. And all the teachers are kind of like, are you allowed to say that? And I'm like, there are very few things in the temple we actually say we can't say. And they're still like, I don't know. And then next conference, Bednar gets up and says, we need to be more clear. And then what does everybody else do? They start doing my whole lesson. So that was a closer, like it happened within months. But I just think that was what was going on. I'm doing these things that I see the church needs to do.
Yeah.
Or else they're going to lose their youth. It's the old quote, right? That the churches prioritize the grandparents in San Pete County instead of the grandkids in Salt Lake.
That's Richard Bushman you're quoting.
Yep.
And he's quoting, he's basically, that's a really important quote. I think I would love to mention it every Mormon Stories podcast episode. When Richard Bushman is speaking at a Faith Again fireside in Salt Lake City, and they ask him, is the church going to someday become honest with its historical narrative? Because, it's unsustainable. And he admits that the church has been teaching an untrue narrative. He says that it's unsustainable. And then he says Boyd K. Packer helped obscure the history intentionally by his own words to save by saving the grandmothers in San Pete County. He sacrifices the sons in Salt Lake or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that was an acknowledgement that we've been deceived.
Yep. And I think that's key because I'm just saying I taught the adult religion class and they were sweet people, but I'm thinking, as morbid as this sounds, I'm like, you got 10 years left. Like you can keep this generation, and I'm teaching literally 500 kids a year and saying you could keep these 50 old sweet people and lose these 500. And to me, the church is clear. Do you want a church? I mean, we see the growth of the church, the percentage slowing down like crazy. Do you want a church? Because if you do, you need to fix this and you need to reach out to them. And you're telling me that we need to reach them and we need to reach out to them. And so I'm doing these things and I'm getting results and I'm having kids come to my class and my numbers are skyrocketing and kids who never come to seminary in my class. And I'm getting the results that seminary wanted, but my methods in doing it weren't seminary approved. And to me, that was the whole point. Why am I getting results and you're not? You're doing it the seminary church way, and I'm doing it in my own version, the Givens version of Mormonism, and it's working. So why would we not adapt? Why would we not change? You have all the evidence. Russell Nelson comes in and blows everything up. He says, no, we're not going to do Mormon. We're not going to do the tabernacle choir. We're going to change this and change that. And we're going to do 2-hour church. And I taught a whole lesson on look at how, like, if you're paying attention, look at what the church is doing. Bye-bye Boy Scouts. Hello, come follow me. All of these things that they're doing. And I'm saying, keep going, keep the trajectory, keep moving, keep going. Don't wait. Trust that we're going that direction. And, but I mean, and I'm also very critical of culture. There was a lesson where we were doing repentance and we watched that old, really cringy video, Godly Sorrow, with Aaron Eckhart,
Oh yeah.
And the teacher the bishop is like looking at this girl and they obviously had something sexual and she can't get a recommend. And we watched that in my class and we broke it down and we'd pause and say, is this right? Do you agree with this? How do you feel? Is this what repentance should feel like? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's just a way that I knew that, look, I'm critiquing the church, but I'm not critiquing the modern church as much other than not being 100% on board with the family proclamation and certainly not being on board with the Mormon, not saying the word Mormon. But other than that, I'm 100% on board with what the church is doing moving forward. And so to be kind of ostracized and to be called out and to not be trusted in that moment is kind of, it was very telling, and it made me feel very, you really don't mean what you say. Right? You want to do this, but you're scared or you're afraid or you're worried or whatever else. So that was a fundamental point during everything else that's going on.
I mean, I still relate to that because whether it's my mission experience or the meetings I had with Elder Holland, when you find out that marriage, you grow up thinking that Jesus cares about the one, that the church cares about love beyond all things, that the church is all about families. So then when you find out people are literally killing themselves. Families are literally being destroyed. And you give notice to the leaders. And then they're like, well, we can't move too quickly. And you're like, well, okay, people are dying or people are leaving the church. If you believe that salvation's everything, people are leaving in droves, families are being blown up, and we're going to wait for the gerontocracy 5 or 10 or 15 years to catch up. It's really hard to hold that tension and just be patient.
Absolutely. And I mean, at Timpanogos that year, we had 2 students take their life by suicide. And like, I'm watching this happen. I'm having kids in my class and kids that aren't even a part of the church finding out that, hey, are you the teacher that wants to talk to kids? Are you the teacher that's affirming towards queer people? And I'm like, I guess. And so I'm having kids that I don't know just wanting somebody to talk to. And at that point I start thinking, well, I'm not qualified. So I start looking into, social work programs because I want to follow Brene Brown's footsteps. I want to be a social worker. I want to be as qualified as I could to make sure I'm reaching out. But man, watching it happen and feeling like, hey, are you guys seeing this? Like, do you not care? They're like, we care, but I'm like, but what? Like, what else is a priority here? Like, why is obedience to prophets, old prophets, more important than saving real lives and real families and real kids and causing the anxiety and depression our students are feeling to go down? Why on earth? Why on earth would anything be a priority over that? I just couldn't wrap my brain around it, having had no history in Mormonism, thinking, wait, you told me all, like you said, all about reaching the one, all about loving people, all about Jesus taking care of the lost sheep. And I feel like I'm doing that. And then I'm getting shot down and in trouble and knowing, truthfully knowing, okay, I'm putting myself on the line for these kids. It was a price I was willing to pay up to a point. And then I couldn't do it anymore.
Yeah, you just run out of steam.
Exactly.
All right, well, let's talk about 2019.
Yeah, it's been great. So, I mean, I also failed to mention at this time I had cancer.
What?
Yeah, crazy. I'm telling, what a story, right? Like all of these things that are going on.
That's not even in your notes.
I know. That's how crazy it was. So like I have all these little cancer scars. So it's a type of cancer called B-cell lymphoma. And I had this massive surgery, and mercifully it was really slow moving and all of that. But the fact is that it's like miscarriage or infertility, miscarriage, cancer, like seminary warnings. And it's so, my brother leaving the church after having traumatic experience, it's just back to back to back while I'm holding all of this inside and trying to just bottle it up to help the kids. I'm like, I will bite this bullet. I will do what I have to, because when I talk to them and I hear them, I just want to help them, So yeah, that's going on. And then 2019 comes around and the Givens write The Christ Who Heals. And we have like a book club on that at Timpanogos because our principal is awesome and he loves the Givens. And it's game changing where they're talking about, they're critiquing Mormonism again. They mention in the Christ Who Heals, Joseph changing the phrase like a state of awful wickedness, it says now in the Book of Mormon. It originally was a state of awful woundedness. And they're saying, what changes when we begin to view our inherent state as wicked versus our inherent state as wounded? And then they talk about the word healer instead of savior. And why do we need a savior? We don't need a savior. We need a healer. Jesus doesn't save us from a vindictive God. He's one with the Father, right? And this is the type of Mormonism I'm just like, yes, thank you. And it's speaking to my soul. And I'm just like, I'm riveted by it. And I continue to hear this type of Mormonism and think this is going to be the future. But then I'm going to church in my own ward. And I'd been released as an elders quorum president, not because of disciplinary, just because, a different calling. And I'm in the priest quorum and I'm hearing the talks and I'm just like, why are we so freaking behind? Like, it's so antiquated what I'm hearing in this ward. It's so far from what I believe Mormonism, the trajectory of Mormonism, and it's certainly from the Givens Mormonism and Flumen. And I had read Mason's Planted, and I had read these things and I'm thinking, this is it. This is the new apologetics, the neo-apologetics. We're getting rid of the Truman Madsons. We're getting rid of all of that mindset. And we're going to focus moving forward on a pastoral approach, which is speaking to not only my heart, but also to my students, right? And then I go to church and it's the exact opposite. And I'm just thinking, there's a disconnect here. And so I begin to kind of, not want to go to church, which is a problem as a seminary teacher, Yeah. If I do go to church, which I had to, I'd sit and I'd be holding my phone. I remember days that I would have like an AirPod in my ear and I'd have my hand over my ear, pretending like it wasn't there in the very back, and I'd be watching a soccer game. right? Because I just got into English soccer. I'm like, this is awesome. So I'd be watching soccer and thinking, I don't want to hear this. I don't want to do this. Sunday school was just torture. Like the way that we talked about Nephi and how he's so good because he's obedient. I couldn't hear it anymore. It was too draining and it didn't feed my soul. So now I start realizing, oh crap, it's not just my students that are not liking it. I'm truthfully not liking it either. For the first time, I started thinking the scriptures aren't that fulfilling. I started thinking I don't like the temple and like I don't actually feel bad about not liking the temple. And that was like a big shift for me. I even had a moment when I was driving home from work one day and I hadn't said a swear word since I joined the freaking church in 2007. This is 2018. And I'm driving home with all of this anger from how I'd been treated. And I just had like this mental thought of like, just let it out. And I just the whole way home, 20 minutes, just dropping every swear word I hadn't said for years and years and years.
Like the King's English.
Exactly. And I started thinking like, am I going to like lose the spirit? And you know what I felt after? I felt better. Yeah. And I'm like, wait, and so there's these chips. Or I taught DNC 89 and I had this whole lesson prepared and I'm doing the research on it from, researching on Mormon Think and other sources and saying like, well, what about this? And why did it change? The Sunstone podcast had an amazing episode where Lindsay Hansen Park, she goes over the history of the word of wisdom and how it wasn't part of the temple recommend questions. And I'm thinking, okay, I have ADHD. I'm taking Adderall. I can't sleep very well. Maybe coffee is going to help. So in my prep period, between first and third period, I go to 7-Eleven, I grab a coffee for the first time.
Whoa, wait a minute.
Yep.
So it's a CES seminary teacher is drinking coffee to prepare for his CES lesson.
Exactly.
I love it.
And so like, I didn't wear my dress shirt because they would look. So I had like my hoodie over and I zipped it up and I get my coffee and it helped. And I'm like, and then I taught the next class and guess what? I thought I had the spirit.
By the way, coffee is so much more healthy than Diet Coke or Ritalin. Holy crap.
Exactly. And so I'm like, this is it. This is going to be better for me. But yet I don't feel guilty. Maybe I should, but knowing what I know now, I'm starting to learn more about the history and the context and what's been brought up in CES letter and other things where it's kind of depleting my fear of disobeying because I'm like, you're just enforcing this based on fear. And fear has never been it's been a powerful motivator, but it's never been a good enough motivator for me. And so as I'm kind of experimenting and just trying to reevaluate where I'm at, I'm listening to my rap music that I used to love when I was growing up. And I'm just allowing more things into my life, basically almost reverting back to my former self. If you think of a pendulum where I'm super not Mormon, then ridiculously Mormon, it's shifting back down towards, hey, here's maybe a neutral ground is what I was thinking. And so it's at this time we have our baby. I mentioned that at the end, and meeting Remy was just a life-changing experience. And I looked as I was holding this sweet miracle baby, and conference was on the TV, and I just thought, I don't want him to be a part of this. It's not working for me. I don't want him to have the guilt and shame and harm that I've had. That was a big moment where I thought, I don't think I want to raise him in this. I'm still a seminary teacher, man.
Yeah.
And so these are things that are happening. One moment in particular was huge for me in seminary, and I think this was a big catalyst for what ends up happening next. So we have our area trainings, in June, one week where we have to be there for these trainings, and they do different activities, and we have different broadcasts and whatnot that we have to watch. But we had this activity that day that was speed friending. Okay, so by the way, I came to seminary with a little rainbow lapel pin. Just look, you say we can reach out. I'm not affirming. I'm just saying I'm here and I love queer people, right? And now they're like, we have a gay seminary teacher, right, down in Utah Valley. And now they're using it. I'm like, wait, but why couldn't I have this pin? They looked at me like I had, I don't know what they thought. They just looked at me like I was a freak for wearing this little tiny rainbow pin on my lapel to just be like, hey, I see gay people.
You're saying there was an openly gay seminary teacher?
Not yet, but he was there.
Oh, okay.
And he wasn't openly gay.
Got it.
But now he is. Yeah. And now they're like, we love you and we're so glad you're teaching. And it's like, cool. I listened to his podcast and he specifically said, I'm not speaking about any of this. I don't share this with my students. I'm like, that's why they love you. You're kind of like their token person, and you don't upend, you don't turn anything over.
Closeted stuff.
Exactly. So, I do that. And then we have this break for lunch, and then we're going to do a speed friending activity, meaning think of speed dating, but with awkward small talk with seminary teachers I'm never going to talk to and don't care about. And my wife our baby, he's 2 years old and he still stinks at sleeping. Like he's just not a good sleeper. And especially at the beginning, like just not a good sleeper. And my wife's exhausted. And it was up right across from the Timpanogos Temple. I live a couple blocks away from that, right by American Fork High School. And she's like, Mark, I'm breaking down. I'm having a hard day. Like, what can you do? And I'm thinking, it's lunchtime. We have a stupid speed friending activity. I can give her like a 3.5 hour nap if I go home, get the baby, bring him back, and just hold him, right? And I'm thinking, seminary is a family employer. They mention this all the time as a major perk. We love families. We care about your families. They're always like, how's your family? How's your family? And so I go home and I pick up our little Remy and I go into a room and I just am holding him and I have the speaker turned on, so I'm listening to whatever they're doing. And Rachel's sleeping and I feel so good. I'm holding my sweet baby and just like in tears at the beauty that he is and the miracle he is in from my life. And one of my friends from my time at Pleasant Grove brings me like our food and he's my kid's godfather. And so he holds Remy, and then I bring Remy to a training like with my faculty and everybody's happy and good. And I just think this was a beautiful moment. I'm so grateful for an employer that allows me to, take time off to hold my kid and take care of my wife. A couple weeks later, we find out that was not kosher, and I'll tell you why. But right after that, maybe a week or two later, we have Terryl and Fiona Givens come, and they are requested by my principal at Timpanogos. And it was just so good. And they're talking about God saving all of his people and how we don't need to be bound by fear. And the almost immediate backlash in the meeting was shocking to me.
So Givens is speaking.
Yep.
And the teachers are rebelling?
Yeah. Well, they're just like, I think we need to have fear. I want to know that God is mad at me. I'm like, what? And you could see the look on their faces was kind of like, what on earth? Like, okay, like that's weird. Why would you want God to be mad at you and punish you? And the teachers are like boom, 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 just kind of like no one bought into what they're saying other than like the 4 millennials that were in Utah Valley on the front row that were like in tears because it's like, thank you for teaching a God that we love. And guess what happens after that? Another warning letter from seminary saying, hey, just because people teach this does not make it doctrine. And I'm just like, first off, why do you continue to invite people if you're going to continue to say that they're not teaching truth? And then second,
what's the warning letter?
The warning letter is to all seminary teachers, basically say, just like before.
Oh, okay. Not to you personally.
Not to me yet.
Okay.
Nope. Just saying, hey, just so you know, everyone, this isn't doctrine. The Spirit will teach you truth, blah, 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 blah. Or this might be doctrine, but you need to get a testimony. And everybody took that as, oh, cool, we don't have to engage with what they're saying.
I mean, I guess it's
healthy.
I mean, I'm torn on that. It's
because we want people to question.
Yeah.
But the rationale for that is, don't question things that are progressive. Just go back to your conservative orthodoxy.
Yeah.
So I want people to take a second and not believe everything as doctrine, because that's what we do too often in Mormonism. But that's not the approach. The approach wasn't study for yourself. It was really like, hey, nope, this isn't good. We don't buy into this. You're okay. Just go back to the way we've always done it.
So how is Terryl? Is it Terryl and Fiona or just
Terryl and Fiona?
How are they handling pushback from seminary teachers around fear and?
Yeah, so they were really loving. Especially Fiona. Terryl, I think prefers writing to speaking. I think he just likes
a little grumpy sometimes.
Exactly. I think he likes being in his head, and I think he likes the flowery writing. Fiona, I felt very pastoral. I met them both. I walked up to them and I said, "Hey, I just want to tell you, like, you have given me a place in Mormonism that I didn't feel like I had."
Wow.
And Fiona like gives me a hug, like, "Tell me more about you." And it was love that I hadn't felt from seminary or really anyone in a while.
Yeah.
And Terryl was kind, but in the moment I could kind of see the faces as almost one of confusion. I mean, they had answers and they had, I thought, very compelling answers, but it was more like, how is there pushback to this? And eventually, like, because I knew they had this interaction with the Utah Valley Seminary, he and Fiona both did a podcast. I think it was on Faith Matters. And somebody asked that question, like, how have you been received? And he's like, with the exception of one place, this has been unit. And I'm like, I know what that place was. I know exactly what that place was. And he was kind of like, yeah, that place was just off. And I'm reading between the lines because I know things that the audience doesn't. But clearly it was like, these teachers, man, like, we're trying to help you and your kids and you just don't want to buy it. Like, how could that be? And this is after they had been appointed at the Maxwell Institute. Like, they had the stamp of approval. In fact, for us as seminary teachers, it's like, you're at BYU. Like, that's kind of the dream. They should have had like the ultimate trump card on all of us, but yet the teachers just did not want to buy it. And I'm still baffled as to why, because they weren't beating up the church. They were just trying to make it bigger. That was what was weird. They could have been a lot firmer, and I know they've been firmer, but yeah, fascinating, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's also just a little bit weird. Growing up, the type of Mormonism I grew up in, the brethren, Packer or McConkie or, they would be instructing everyone on what the doctrine is. And this feels like a transition for me, that the church is relying on theologians, mid-level managers, authors that don't have any real authority to be instructing on matters as important as the atonement, theology. Yep. I mean, in some ways, that's actually feels like a positive move, but it also feels like an abdication of responsibility a little bit.
For sure. And that's the big tension where it's like, oh, cool. Like, I'm glad that these voices are out in the world, but by them not coming from prophets, it means nobody has to change.
Yeah.
It's like, cool, you can take this if you want. I'm like, I love it. They're like, awesome, good. It worked for you. Oh, it doesn't work for you. They're not prophets. You're good. Right? They're speaking out of both sides of their mouth and trying to rescue people without being firm and clear.
Yeah.
And so like, I think Renland, he quotes the Givens in like one of his footnotes in a conference talk. And for me, I'm like, it's a footnote. Look, like it's happening. And
crumbs.
Exactly.
Crumbs
Literally.
for Mark. Crumbs for Mark.
Exactly. I'm like lapping him up, like, thank you for these little crumbs, And Uchtdorf quite like he puts the NIV instead of the King James version. I'm like, look, see progressiveness. Like we're doing it. And I think it's extremely intentional, because then just like everything else that they've always done to intellectuals, if crap hits the fan, then the church can throw these apologists under the bus and be like, oh, you're gone.
Exactly. It's plausible deniability.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which is tragic, because the Givens Mormonism is the future of Mormonism. It will get there. Mm-hmm. It's going to hurt a lot of people in the meantime. And it's sad that it's not coming from people who say they can see the future. Like that's the biggest thing. You see the future, but yet you need Terryl and Fiona Givens to be able to do this. Like that's messed up.
What I would say is how many people are going to get hurt in the meantime
100%.
While they're waiting and delaying.
100%.
Yeah.
Me included, friends. Like, I mean, so many students still reaching out. I have a group of students that are, they followed me on Instagram and they're like, hey, we want to hear more about what's going on. And it's probably like 350 kids. And, I'll send out polls or whatever. Hey, how you doing? And like 98% of them, like, I'm not going to church. These are BYU students that are like, yeah, my ecclesiastical endorsement's up after I graduate and I am never going back to church. Mm-hmm. And so I'm like, cool. Like you can keep your, however, let's say my followers, let's just say I have almost 2,000 at the beginning of the year and now it's gone down because I've been posting more anti-church stuff. And let's just say 1,200 of them are faithful and 350 of them are walking away.
Yeah.
At a minimum.
Yeah.
At a minimum. Yeah. And so it's been really interesting. Right around this time too, I have a really good friend who I met in the 471 class that I had to take concurrently when I was a student teacher. Amazing person. Her mom's like a convert, and she's from Colombia. She's a really brilliant, awesome, amazing friend of mine and a great teacher. Progressive like I was in a lot of ways. She ended up having a baby and it was really special. So she became part-time. She really grew a Spanish seminary program at Provo High and also at Timpanogos where I was. And at this time, she and I kind of brainstormed, hey, what can we do so that you can get your benefits? Because they moved her from full-time to part-time and she lost benefits and she has a baby and all of that. So we brainstormed this idea of a new, basically a job assignment. In seminary, they have things called coordinators, where let's say you go out to North Carolina, you teach an institute class, and then you are in charge of monitoring the called seminary teachers in that area. And I thought, cool, why don't you go and tell our area director about this idea? You can be the Spanish coordinator. You can teach two seminary classes in Spanish, and then you can go and monitor the other Spanish classes that are going around. It was a great idea. She presents it, and they're like, we don't know about that yet. We'll have to get feedback and blah, blah, blah. Because again, it can't come from the bottom up. then top down, we get a new area administrator for seminary who just got back from a mission to a Spanish-speaking country and says, we need to grow the Spanish, population. And so we should come up with a coordinator. And now all of a sudden, revelation, we need a coordinator position. And so my friend applies for this job that she created, but that was basically told she couldn't do it. And in this process, there's another Spanish-speaking person. They kind of have some battles about the need of a Spanish class, blah, blah, blah. But eventually, this is the key moment for her, and it was just another sign for me of where seminary is. There's a conversation that was held like off the record between the two principals that were engaged and this area director, just talking about this idea of a Spanish class. And the comment was made, I don't know if we should hire her because she's a woman, because she's a mom. And that was conveyed in part to my friend who's like, wait, what? Like, no, you can't. And so then I come in, this was a conversation in the lunchroom that we were having at the school. And she's like, hey, you need to listen to this. And I wasn't there to hear it. There was one other teacher and he's like, I don't know. She goes up the chain to HR and says, hey, like I've been discriminated against because she doesn't get the job. I've been discriminated against. The sole reason they provided was because I'm a mom. That's unacceptable. And the church does their HR evaluation. They talk to my area director and he denies having anything done. Of course he did. I really think they kind of coached him into what to say. And they're like, give us a reason, any reason. He's like, this person, when they taught, I felt the Spirit so strongly. Perfect. Thank you. Right. Goes back to my friend, says after a couple weeks, months, says there's no evidence of discrimination. But before they tell her that, they force her to sign an NDA, non-disclosure agreement, and said, if you don't sign this, you won't have the protection of the church in case there's retaliation. And she's like, well, I have to sign it? She's like, yes, you have to sign it. If you don't sign this, then we're not going to tell you and you don't have protection of the church. So she signs her NDA and they say, there's been no evidence of discrimination. It was just a misunderstanding. You haven't been discriminated against. And I mean, obviously she's just brokenhearted. She can't even tell me, right? Because she's worried the church is going to freaking sue her because she signed an NDA. And eventually she's just like, I can't believe this happened to me. So she quit seminary.
Has she talked publicly about this? Because I think I remember seeing about.
She hasn't. She hasn't. I talked about it.
I wonder if she would tell the story publicly.
I think if you asked her, I actually asked her if she would. She's like, if you asked, she would tell it.
Okay.
She's like, I'm not going to ask, but.
All right. Just 1 second.
Yeah.
Laura, hi, this is John on Mormon Stories, and I want to ask you to come on Mormon Stories and tell your story.
Perfect.
So we would love to have you.
The formal request. And she's so good and so brilliant. And honestly, that to me was just because she was so good and she was so sweet. And then I'm seeing the inner workings of this system and being like, this is slimy. There's lies. There's, we know this from my experience before. This is from God, but we really know it's a teacher that's kind of forcing this to happen. And it's just happening over and over and over. And so when they get up and they're like, brothers and sisters, we love you. We're so happy to be here with you. I'm like, you're full of it. You're full of it. You're just lying. And I don't believe a word you're saying. And so at this time, I don't know what, I'm also teaching an institute class, right? Because my principal, again, as progressive as I was, he trusts me. And he's like, you're reaching kids. We need a transition class from seminary to institute because kids don't go to institute. And I made a request to my area director. I said, can you move me to the institute? Because I reach college kids better. The lax rules that I have is going to work better in institute where they don't have to be there because it's a choice that they're making as an adult. And he looked at me and says, we're going to have to wait for about 20 years. I'm like, 20 years? Like I'm literally looking at the requirements from seminary. It says 5 years experience and a master's degree. I just finished my master's in education. I have 5 years of experience. I'm making it work. And he's like, yeah, typically we want people to have, about 20 years experience. I'm like, but it says, he's like, and I know that other people have been there earlier, but that was kind of an anomaly. And I'm like, can I be the anomaly? Like it's basically I'm trying to save my job because I'm not going to change what I'm teaching. But I'm also not going to, just go down without a fight. So I reach out and he wouldn't let it. So I went to the institute director and I said, hey, I'm a seminary teacher. I'm teaching in the Valley. I really want to teach at the institute. What can I do? He says, well, why don't you just apply to be a coordinator and then go out somewhere, in the mission field and then come back and then we'll have you at the institute. I'm like, you're not here. Nobody's listening to me. right? Nobody cares. I'm just some peon. Like you mentioned last episode, I don't have money. I don't have a name. I'm just some random guy. And they're happy that I'm getting people in seminary and institute, but they don't care about me as a person. I'm easily collateral damage. And so I'm teaching this transition class, and we're talking about things like, hey, are you having a miserable time at church? Yeah, what can we do to make it better? We talk about Heavenly Mother. I quote Rachel Hunt Steenblick in her book Mother's Milk, and we talk about life. I said, we always talk about life being a test. Where's the word test in Scripture? It's in there, and it says prove, try, whatever. I'm like, prove and try are not test. I said, if life is a test, it's not like the American educational system. And these kids are eating it up. And they're posting pictures on Instagram and on Twitter and being like, you need to come to this class. My class is growing. I have people that are...
What are they saying?
They're just loving it. They're like, this is exactly the teacher that we need. This is the type of stuff I want to hear. And I'm just like, yep.
And what would they say they loved about it?
They just loved that it was progressive. They loved that it was talking openly about the challenges. They loved that it was open about Heavenly Mother and calling out church culture and providing space. They loved that it was something that gave them hope and wasn't the typical, hey, you suck, here's fear, you need to repent, Mormonism is the only right way. Another one being baptism. I talked, hey, you were all baptized at 8 in here, right? Yeah, everybody cool. Did you get baptized for remission of sins? No. Did you have real agency when you did it? No. Then what's the point of baptism? And so we had these conversations, and they loved it because I'm answering the questions that they have. Mm-hmm. And how do I know they're questions? Because I freaking asked them. I've been asking for years. And now at this point, I'm 100% solid on, I know exactly what kids are struggling with. I know exactly what they need. I know exactly what they want. Not because I'm a genius, just because I asked and I listened, right? And so all of this is going around, which I'm seeing as positive, but it's being picked up on. I don't know.
Can I just say, did you ever see the movie Dead Poets Society?
Yeah, I loved it.
I mean, the vibe I'm getting is kind of a Mormon Seminary version of Robin Williams's Dead Poets Society.
I am so honored you said that, because when I was going to school in California, I had a teacher who was just like that, and he made me fall in love with Edgar Allan Poe, and because we watched an episode of The Simpsons where they quote the Raven, and then we watched Dead Poets Society, and I fell in love with the passion of Robin Williams in that, and I thought, if I'm ever a teacher, I want to be like that. So you saying that is like such an honor, because I felt like I wanted to be that person, and I'm so humbled that you recognize that, because that was a huge vision of mine, not for the fame or the glory, because I genuinely love kids.
Well, we all know how that story ends.
Right?
Well, I mean, there's a couple ways that story ends.
Yep.
In sad ways.
Yep.
But inspiring ways.
Inspiring and sad and tragic. And so, yes, thank you. And exactly, like that vision was who I hope to be. And like, I'm passionate, I'm getting up and I'm pacing and it's just, I wish I could show you videos of what my class was like, because the excitement and engagement that is usually, I mean, you walk into a seminary class now, with the exception of maybe a couple, and the kids are going to be asleep. They're going to be on their phones. They're going to be miserable. And you go into my class and it's like lively and discussion and fun, and kids are actually smiling and they walk out feeling better, and they want to be Mormon, and they talk about wanting to go on missions. And it's just, it felt good.
And it's just human nature that's going to breed envy and jealousy. And, Captain, my captain will always be fired. You know, Robin Williams will always be fired.
Yep.
Not just in Mormonism.
Yep.
In any institution.
For sure.
That's just the way humans work.
Exactly. And I had been so competitive in my prior life as an athlete that I thought, I'm not competitive with these people now, because we're on the same team, right? We're on the same team, but they didn't view me that way. Yeah. And so remember from last time, there's just spies from all different directions. I have parents and fellow teachers.
Wait, really quick.
Yeah.
Were you going to say something about holding your baby in addition? Were you going to say something else?
Nope, that was it. My experience when I was just holding him. And it's going to come to it, because that's going to be basically I have an inquisition, and that's a huge catalyst to that. So
it's holding your baby
holding my baby at that meeting and just being like, hey, buddy, like I'm here. I'm letting my wife sleep. They were pissed that I left. So it's a whole inquisition they're going to have.
I just want to make sure we didn't miss something you wanted to say.
No, thank you for that. I appreciate it. And so, this is all going on, and I don't know all the sources, but I do know that I taught a lesson right when the school year was ending on official declaration 2 with the priesthood ban being ended. And it was probably, 120 slides. And I had 90 minutes to teach, and we were being very open. And there's quotes from Missing Sunday School, and there's quotes from Mormon Think, and they're cited in there. But I mean, they're not Mormon Think; they're prophets, right? And I had to change my lesson every time because I can't teach 120 slides in 89 minutes. It's impossible. You can't do it. And so there was a student teacher at the time, and an older guy. He had a previous career and was trying to get into seminary. And I taught one of his kids in like my first period class and another one of his kids in my last period class. And the principal came to watch me teach my last period class. And it was this beautiful message. Look, we were very open about the challenges that we had with the priesthood and temple ban. And we were very open about that struggle. And my final slide was, hey, we need to, like, what does the church teach about repentance? Confess, forsake, etc. And it was, what can we do here? Confess, forsake, etc. And honestly, I'm in tears. These freaking athlete fourth period kids are in tears. Like, I love this. This is beautiful. My principal's in tears. It was just this beautiful message. The principal sends out the PowerPoint to our faculty and says, hey, if you need resources of a good lesson for this topic, here you go. And somehow my area director finds out about this. Our guess is it was the student teacher who asked his kids, hey, did you have this lesson? No, you didn't. Why not? To his kid in first period where the principal wasn't there. And so he made the assumption, the principal, I changed my lesson so that it wouldn't be filled with doubt because the principal was in there. And then he talks to a couple other parents that had kids in my class, and they're like, oh, I don't like that. So they call the area director, which I don't know how they get the number. I only had my area director's number because he was my area director. If you Google his name, no number comes up. No idea how they get it. So now I'm thinking they get it from the secretary, who also really doesn't like me. So it feels, and maybe all of this is made up, but the truth is I had been spied on for so long that none of that would be surprising, right? So I get a call after, we're having our area summer in-service. I'm teaching this institute class. Things are going really well. I get my area director says, hey, can we come talk? Pulls me into like a Relief Society room, says, hey, we need to have a meeting. Can you meet me today down in Salem, Salem Hills or wherever it was?
This is sounding familiar.
Exactly. So it's my seminary excommunication, right? It's another trial. And so I'm like, sure, what's it about? He's like, can't tell you. Okay.
And you got to know it's on the wall.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. And so this one I'm a little bit more aware of.
Yeah.
But still the frustration is I feel like I'm doing what prophets want. So we go down and my principal's not there. Which he typically would be. And the area director said, well, we just don't want him here. We later find out that the principal, they bypassed my principal because they knew he was my team. Like he was going to take my side.
So they wanted him.
Yep. And so they bring in our area director and our assistant area director. And I liked the assistant area director at the time. I obviously didn't like the area director. And they begin to ask me some questions. And they're like, so tell me about what's going on with this. What was this tweet about? And they show me a picture of the student who tweeted a picture of me saying and when she will come, we will see her as she is, instead of he, meaning God, or teaching Elohim meaning the gods, plural, who are the gods, a heavenly mother and a heavenly father. What was this critique of the American education system, et cetera, et cetera? We said, we got a call from a parent that said their kid doesn't want to go on a mission now because they didn't feel like they were ready for it. And I'm like, but how's that bad? It's like, we should never tell kids that they shouldn't go on missions. I'm like, no, but I didn't say that. I said we should go on missions if we're ready for them, right? Then they said, we also went on your Twitter account and we were scrolling through your tweets and we saw some things that we thought were inappropriate. I had tweeted, I had a really crappy day because I often did after seminary because I felt so freaking beat up by people. And I went on a bike ride to blow off steam and my tire popped. And so I tweeted because I need some validation. I'm like, had a terrible day and went to bike ride to blow off steam, FML, meaning F my life.
Yeah.
And they're like, a seminary teacher should never say FML. I'm like, they're like, we had to look it up and we were appalled, And then they're like, there's a video from a YouTuber named Cody Ko, who I think millennials just love. And he's funny. He critiques stupid videos. And I said, this is the stuff we like to see. And they clicked on it. They're like, and Brother Oslund, immediately the spirit left. We were just disgusted that any seminary teacher would ever watch this. Mm-hmm. And so now there's just this inquisition. What about, and then the part where it got really, I was heartbroken and furious. They asked, did you hold your baby during an in-service training? Mm. And I said, yeah, I did. Is that a problem? They're like, you missed the in-service. I'm like, it was speed friending. My wife wasn't sleeping. You have kids? Yeah, I do. Would you have done this? Well, I'm like, no. I pushed back really strongly. I said, you remember President Monson, who was prophet like 2 years ago? And he told this whole story about he was late to meetings because his wife needed him. That's the type of person I thought I could be in seminary. They're like, well, you can, but I'm like, no, I don't want to hear that.
Did they put that in writing?
They're going to talk about meetings, coming to meetings.
Okay.
And like never, like you'll see. They don't quote the baby, but that's exactly what it is.
Okay.
And I wish I would have recorded this one because that was the Inquisition. Then they come back with all the feedback eventually. And the area director and assistant area director are like, he's taking notes. So the assistant area director is like, oh, here's my way of making sure that your side is fully represented. I'm going to ask you these questions. And I'm going to type out your responses. And I'm like, represented for what? They're like, well, we need to go to HR and talk about this. This is serious. I'm like, okay. Is there a warning? They're like, we don't know yet. When will we know? A couple weeks. I might not have a job. They're like, here's the situations. Nothing happens. You have a final warning, or you're terminated and you have a benefits package that comes along. And I'm like, and you're not going to tell me? No. My kid has jaundice right now. We're paying thousands of dollars for this. Like, you're not going to tell me. I have cancer. You're not going to tell me? We'll see in a couple weeks. Thanks. Okay. And I now have to go call Rachel and tell her again, hey, guess what? Our job's on the line, except for now she's not working. So it's just my income. We have a baby, and that's extra money, obviously, diapers and all that. And he has jaundice. And so we're spending lots of money on this. And I have cancer. And I immediately start reaching out to my former baseball coaches and other connections saying, I need a job. Like, I need to know that there's a job. And I actually interviewed at a high school in Utah Valley to teach history. And my baseball coach is a coach there. And he talked to the principal, and the principal is going to give me a job to teach history. I had a master's in education, and it would have been a pay cut, but I would have had a job. I just didn't feel like it was good. It wasn't the right fit at the time. And so me and Rachel are just kind of worried what is going to happen. A couple weeks later, I get a call from my area director, which anytime I see his name anywhere, my stomach just drops. And he's like, hey, can you come meet me down in Springville, or not Springville, but Salem Junior, way down south, because it's easier for him, not me, of course. It's always easier for him. And so, cool. Can anyone come? Nope, just you. Okay. And so now it's me, and I show up, and there's the head of HR for seminaries and institutes in my, the
big gun.
Exactly. So I'm like, oh crap. And I'm going to the bathroom, and that's where I see my area director, and he's going to the bathroom. He's like, how you doing, brother? I'm just like, you know this, like, we love you. How's your family? I'm like, I know what you're about to do to me. And I'm just like, fine, good. Like, I can't be open with him, because I'm either going to lash out or I'm going to cry, you know? And I'm so nervous, wondering what's going to happen. And we sit down and we say the stupid prayers, because for some reason it's a spiritual thing to be called out like this. And he's like, Brother Oslund, we're here to tell you, we're giving you a final warning. And in that moment, I begin to just lose it, because I'm so happy. Again, it's the abuse, and then it's the relief that they provide. And we're going to read this letter. We have a very detailed letter for you. We're going to read it in full, and you need to abide by all of it, or else, right? This is it. And I'm like, okay, before we get into this, final warning, meaning this goes away after a year or two. They're like, no, final, meaning you've been teaching for 5 years. If you teach for 40, you'll have this final warning forever. Meaning if you make one more mistake, you're done.
Yeah.
And so in my mind, when I'm hearing this, I'm like, yes, I have a job, good. But then I'm thinking, I'm going to make a mistake.
Yeah.
It's going to happen.
Yeah.
And now looking back on 2020, I know I would have, I'm not going to call out things Donald Trump saying. I'm going to be teaching about Nephi and not say anything about what's going on with Black Lives Matter. Like, I would have been fired. It just would have happened. But so here's the letter. I want to read it because I think it reveals, it leads to why I am now no longer practicing Mormon. Because I tried to make Mormonism work as orthodox, and it broke me, and I got in trouble for it. Then I tried to make Mormonism work as a progressive Mormon, and they're saying very clearly, nope, unacceptable. So then I think there literally is no room for me. You don't want me. I'm not going to do this. So here's the letter. Dear Brother Oslund, final warning. Achieving our objective and purpose in seminaries and institutes requires that we live the gospel, teach effectively, and administer appropriately, a responsibility to which you are entrusted. Recently, however, we learned that you are teaching in a manner that is not in harmony with the expectations of S&I. Yeah, it's like true and also not, because prophets are telling me to do things and I feel like I'm doing. But anyway, although you may view, oh gosh, this is such a dig. Although you may view your actions as acceptable, they nevertheless harm the organization. Think about that. By creating doubt in the doctrines of the restored gospel and teachings of church leaders. You think you're doing good. You're an idiot. You're not doing any good. You're actually harming it. I'm like, we'll see. We'll see who ends up harming more people. Was I harming the church more, or will you? We'll see. I can guarantee you that they harm more people. But anyway, the letter serves as an official final warning.
Well, let me just say, and I don't want to, I want you to read this, but
please.
He said you're harming the institution.
Yes.
He didn't say you're harming the students. There, right?
Yep. It's a huge deal.
There is a difference.
It's a huge deal.
And I do think their loyalty is first to the institution, because I think in their minds, if the institution goes away, there's no way to help the people.
Yep.
So the best way, the number one way to help the people is to protect the institution, and then you help the people as the institution's strong.
At all costs, right? So force the institution to work at any cost, including shame, fear, manipulation, guilt, lying, whatever, because they believe that the institution, the organization is the only way. Whereas I'm literally teaching the opposite and saying, hey, let's be filled with love. And then if they work with the institution, okay, hopefully they do. If they don't, because God saves them and they're all good. They don't view that.
Yeah.
So yes, a key point that they're saying you're harming the institution, the organization. And I'm like, cool, I'm fine harming the organization, because I actually believe I'm living my covenants to mourn.
Sure.
Whereas you are just trying to uphold the obey prophets at all costs.
Totally.
Yeah, so they go for all of this and they say, you have to abide by the objective and teach students the gospel as found in the standard works and be subject to all the regulations of the church and exemplify the teachings. This was a weird one, of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, including those regarding marriage and the family. And that has to be a thing about gay, right? About
same-sex marriage.
It has to be that.
Yeah.
And be a positive example of all gospel principles. And then it says that an addendum to the letter has been prepared. It says, giving you this letter demonstrates our continued trust that you will respond appropriately. Meaning, we give this to you because we love you. It's a court of love. We trust you. That's why we gave you this final warning. We remind you that seminaries and institutes of religion is an at-will employer and may terminate your employment at any time with or without cause. I'm like, oh, cool. So they really, that's the truth. For any reason, they could just go to one of my coworkers and be like, hey, you're fired today. They don't do that, but they could.
That's a Utah thing.
Totally. Is that unique to here?
I think there are plenty of states that are at will.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Because I know with my current employment, it's the same, right?
Yeah.
Therefore, please accept this letter as intended and make the immediate and sustained changes. As you resolve these issues, we are confident you will successfully help us achieve the objective of seminaries and institutes, right? But then this is the letter that was drafted by my area director. And it's lengthy, and I think it describes exactly the mentality of where seminary is. So this area director ends up getting promoted. He's now in charge of everywhere from Lehigh all the way down to southern Utah and into Arizona and Nevada. So he just continues to get more and more promoted, meaning if this was inaccurate or if something was off, like, he should get called out, but he's not. He's becoming more and more of a big deal, which I eventually think he's either going to get called on a mission, not in like a you did bad, but like, we need you, general authority, main deal in seminary. Like, he continues to get promoted. So this is
a letter to you?
This is a
second letter.
Yeah, this is an addendum to the letter to show exactly what I need to do.
Okay.
So here you go. Dear Mark, the following content has been prepared to help you more deeply understand and respond to concerns regarding your teaching. Dallin Oaks, and he quotes this thing from Dallin Oaks, and he's quoting the saints in DNC 101. It says, the Lord gave the saints a parable to help them know his will concerning the redemption of Zion. He told of a nobleman who gave his servants certain commandments and then left them in charge of a vineyard. For a time, and this is bolded, they followed his directions, but then they began to question the Lord's commandments, and eventually they substituted their own judgment on what would be best for the Lord and his vineyard. As a result, the Lord of the vineyard called upon his servants and said, why? What is the cause of this great evil? And he says, after giving this parable, like, will you be guided and trust that I may build them up, blah, 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 blah. So that's the setting, saying, Mark, you used to follow it and now you're not. You think you're doing right, now you're not. You're not trusting the Lord. You're not doing it the Lord's way. So it says, Mark, you need to seek and implement the following principles as you make important changes in your teaching and administering. 1, come to a deeper understanding and awareness that God's ways are higher than your ways, and God's thoughts are higher than ours. Seek to know his will and his ways in working with students. Right off the bat, he's like, you think you know God? You don't know God. You have no idea about God. Also, you don't know his will or his ways. Where I'm like, wait, what do you mean, man? I'm asking kids what they need. He's like, yeah, that's not God's way. God's way is just to do it his way. You don't ask kids, you do it God's way. He said, there are methods that help achieve God's objective. Conversely, there are methods that, when used, cannot achieve God's objective. Unless we are alert, we can easily be deceived by selecting methods that may have been validated by students previously. Basically being like, you have a lot of growth in your class and students like it. But he said, in the end, that falls short in the attainment of God's purposes. In God's work, in order to obtain good results and fruits, we must do things his way. Implying, you're not doing it his way, we do things his way. I know God's way. I'm your key. He's not a key holder, but he's treating me as if he's such. He's in a stake presidency. He thinks that he knows everything about this. Elder Maxwell taught, we may acknowledge his overall plan, but criticize his style because he does things his own way, and we would prefer things to be done in our way. This is Mark, as you make the efforts to understand the Lord's mind and will in your teaching, as if I wasn't doing that. You don't think I was trying to get guidance and trust prophets, right? You will be blessed with an increase of spiritual power and impact. I'm like, how much more impact? I'm the most impactful teacher in the valley. I don't understand. Never criticize, correct, or disagree with the teachings of prophets, seers, and revelators, all capitalized. It's not just seers with the lowercase s, it's seers. In fact, consistently share your love, respect, and concern for them. Share that you're concerned about them, right? And he talks about trusting and patience and faith. And in that part, he says, take down your pictures of Jesus and re-put up the pictures of the apostles. And I said, that just hit me so strongly that you want me to take down Jesus and put up apostles. Like, to me, I'm just like, I know what this church is built on, right?
Wow.
Which is now why I fight so hard against prophets, where I'm like, dude, you are the foundation. Teach all of the truths taught by modern day prophets, seers, and revelators. Do not substitute their teachings with your own personal philosophies, judgments, or opinions. By helping your students understand and ally with truth, they will be strengthened in their faith, and they will learn how to sustain the prophet. Meaning, Mark, you weren't teaching certain things. You didn't talk about how we oppose gay marriage. Teach all of the truths. Don't just teach some. Don't just teach the ones that make kids feel loved. Don't just teach the ones saying everyone's going to be saved. Make sure you teach the ones that say, hey, if you don't repent, you're damned. These were literal conversations that we were having, and I'm just, shocked and disgusted. He says, he quotes Elder Holland, who says, a few scriptures and poems just won't do. Are we really nurturing our youth? And I'm like, wow, that's messed up. 4, teach with greater clarity so students/parents, there we go, aren't confused or feel you are sowing seeds of doubt or weakening faith. Consult with your supervisor about any content or method that you are considering that may be misunderstood. Teach so clearly that your faith is never difficult to detect. He says, teach with great balance. This part made me disgusted inside. The master teacher, Jesus Christ, loves people and teaches them what they must know, including accountability, commandments, corrections, the need for change, growth, and the, quote, hard sayings, or truths that are not popular or readily accepted by the world, but are essential for us to know and live in order to be exalted. And then we go and he elaborates. I'm like, tell me more about that. He's like,
exactly.
Mark, I know that you don't want to talk about how repentance is painful. You need to talk about repentance is painful. It is painful. You need to make sure kids know that this is a painful process. And I'm like, what? You need to make sure they know that if they don't live the gospel, that they are threatening their eternal exaltation, which I wasn't teaching. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, dude, this is warped, man. Like, so remember, I think I read the Givens and I think, yes, look, there's validation for all of this. And he's saying, oh, no. Not only is that wrong, but you have to go the other way and you better start teaching McConkie and Kimball and Fielding Smith, right? And I'm just thinking, this is disgusting. He says, these truths may be taught in an environment of great love, understanding, and strong faith. Meaning, how do we soften this? Well, we don't soften the teachings. We need the hard teachings. We need the pain. He's like, he ends up using an image of a scalpel. He says, we need to cut the kids. They need to be hurt, but do it cleanly and with love so it's more loving and generous. And I'm just thinking, oh my gosh, like this is disgusting. Center your teachings in the scriptures, the words of living prophets, and the curriculum. And I thought, and I told him, I literally have every quote from prophets more than any other teacher in this valley. And they're like, yeah, but you're not centered in the curriculum. I'm like, okay, well, fine. Be cautious as you consider.
Can I just say one thing? Well, I have 2 comments, but the one I'll make right now is they sent Givens to you guys multiple times. Yep. So when they introduce those ideas to you, how it's just so it's so fraught that it's held against you.
Yep.
For incorporating those teachings into your teachings.
Yep. In fact, in my this letter, like the one I had with my area director and assistant area director, I said literally that thing. And my assistant area director, and this is when I lost trust for him, said, but Mark, you know that not everything said by them is doctrine. And I'm like, okay. Like it was just so insulting because I felt whatever I called the spirit, elevation, emotion, you name it, I call this doctrine and they're saying, oh, but you know that's not all true. And you know you can't take their word for it. I'm like, oh my gosh. So yes, John, you're exactly right. Let's see. Professional administrative concerns. Communicate more clearly to your supervisor any personal needed absence from professional meetings. And I said, is this about my baby? He said, yes. Ugh. And I'm like, now I'm weeping. So I'm simultaneously going through tears of joy for having a job and then immense anger and then tears of, it's my freaking baby in a speed friending activity. I didn't miss anything substantive. It wasn't Kim Clark coming down. It wasn't Jesus coming down. It was speed friending, which a bunch of dorky seminary teachers I never want to see in my life, right? Like that's why that's it. And he said, well, Mark, it wasn't just that. The exception, we can't have the exception become the rule. I'm like, I've never done that before because I just had a freaking kid. Like, what do you mean, And he's like, just be clear and be upfront. I'm like, it's the summertime. Like if I take a day off because I don't want to wake up and go to work, he's like, I know. I'm like, no, you don't know, man. Like, anyway, so now I'm heartbroken and I'm just hungry and like hungry for love and validation, but instead I'm feeling alone. And then my HR rep comes over and like kind of puts a shoulder on my side and my area director comes over and puts his hand on my shoulder like, it's okay, brother, it's okay. And I'm just like, you are disgusting. Like, I'm just thinking, get off of me. You are so far from God. And at that time, the head HR guy says, Mark, you should be so grateful for what Brother Linford did for you. Sorry, I just dropped his name. I don't know if I should dox him or not, but yeah, I don't care. I hate him. But anyway, I mean, I don't hate him you get it. But sorry, I've been intentionally not saying names, but yeah, anyway, he, and I was like, let me guess what happened. Like you had a meeting with Chad Webb and with Russ Bullock and with all of these people and HR and Steve Linford and they were going to say, let's terminate him. And Steve Linford said, no, let's give him another chance. And they're like, that's exactly what happened. Therefore, they think he's merciful to me. And I'm like, yeah, this isn't mercy, man. This isn't what I need. He said, hold students to a higher degree of accountability. I had told students, hey, you know what? This is a non-mandatory class. If you tell your parents that you're gone, I will mark you present. If you tell them and they know and they're okay with it, show me the text, show me the message, whatever. And so I wouldn't, keep roll accurately or whatever else. Or if they had makeup work, I'd be like, makeup work's stupid. This is seminary. You don't do makeup work in California if you don't come. So I'm just write a half page of what you learned about Jesus this year. There's your 20 days of makeup work. He says, communicate to them your expectation to be in class on time and do their best to complete the elevate learning requirements, which is such a stupid phrase they have right now. Remember that high love and low expectations lead to a fraternal relationship, a buddy-buddy relationship, which is lenient and negatively affects students' growth. That's what they said. I'm like, how dare you? Whereas an environment of high love and high expectations leads to students experiencing miracles. I'm like, dude, I'm literally seeing miracles. I'm seeing kids who are wanting to be Mormon that never wanted to be Mormon, kids coming to seminary that literally didn't come for years, kids doing all this work to go on missions, and you're saying that's not miracles because I don't care if they're 5 minutes late to class. Seek to more fully represent the first presidency in your work in other settings. This was the Twitter comment. What does this look like with your colleagues? That goes all the way back to my arguments way back in Pleasant Grove. With students, meaning talking to them outside of class. Other settings. As you seek to represent the first presidency more fully, your students, colleagues, and others will see you as a strong spiritual mentor, which will inspire them to become more fully connected to the Savior. And while I don't disagree, I thought, am I not a strong spiritual mentor at this point? With 2,000 people that are following me on Instagram and kids that are coming to my class from other am I not a strong one? Like dozens of kids going on missions, kids getting baptized that weren't Mormon in Utah County from my seminary class. Am I not a strong mentor already? I guess not in the way they wanted, right? And he says, number 4, never communicate privately with any of your students electronically. This is S&I policy and is designed to protect you. Fine. Okay, whatever. I don't disagree, but I told him, like, if a kid messaged me and says, hey, I think I might want to die tonight, I'm going to message him. And obviously they didn't like that. But I'm like, do you want me to just ignore it? Do you want me to just ignore this kid reaching out? I can't. in good conscience let that happen. I can't allow it to happen. And then he says, this is going to matter because of my seminary training, who has a very similar verbiage happen to him. Mark, I would encourage you not just to conform to these requirements, but transform into a servant in the vineyard, hearkening all the way back to, you think you're doing it God's way, you're not. Who does the Lord's will in the Lord's way in caring for those students in your classes. By making this transformation, your impact in leading souls to Christ will increase. Merely conforming to these requirements, think of this, will lead to future problems and termination. And I challenged him. I was like, tell me how you'll know if I will conform. He's like, the Spirit will tell me. And now I'm thinking, oh crap. So this guy who thought my first boss at Pleasant Grove was the best in seminary, this guy who thinks that, all of these things that are going on, like you are so lucky to have him, blah, blah, blah. This dude is going to be judging by the Spirit to know if I've conformed or transformed. Like I'm screwed. I'm screwed. We hope that you will make these necessary changes so you can teach with great impact and continue your employment, and then in quotes, find joy therein in seminaries and in institutes. The letter ends. And then my final question as I'm being ripped apart is, so what's going to happen next? He's like, well, we're going to move you to Provo High School. So not only are they separating me from a school that I loved without me saying bye to students in the middle of the summer, they're also separating me from the area with my friends. So now I'm completely alone in the Utah South area with a new area director, with a new school. And he's like, you are expected to attend all meetings. You have to be doing all the things from your previous warning letter, this letter, etc. moving forward. This will be on your final warning letter for good, or on your final record for good. And make the changes. And I'm like, how are we going to check in? Like, we'll be checking in. We'll make sure. Okay.
They're basically just saying, go find another job.
That's exactly it.
That's what it feels like to me.
So eventually, John, I find out that was exactly the conversation that they had. The conversation was, and again, they think they're merciful, but they're like, this guy is not going to work in seminary. We're going to make it so uncomfortable for him that we're going to push him out now so that he's not 10 years down the road and even less able to find another career, which in some ways is a merciful thing, but also they're the reason why I need to find another job. If they would just trust what I was doing, because they will be doing the same thing in 10 years. Yeah. But I get it. They can't get out in front. So what a mess, man. So I'm driving home and I'm just in tears and just like, what the heck do I do now? I pack up my stuff at Timpanogos High School the next day. One of my friends moves with me. I'm just pissed off. And I decide a couple things. I decide I'm not putting any personality into lessons. I'm not walking outside of my classroom until the bell rings. So meaning I'm not greeting students. I'm not going to get to know them. I'm not going to say a word to them. I'm going to teach them. My lesson plans will not be creative. They will literally be copy and pasted from the curriculum. And what this does to me is it takes away all of my joy in teaching. Because the two things I love the most were teaching kids, connecting with them on a personal level, and helping them see new ways to look at Mormon things. And I just, as soon as I'm driving home, I'm like, this isn't going to work. I'm going to get in trouble. Oh, and I also asked, by the way, I'm like, how are you going to know, what's going to be classified as an offense that will terminate this? Like if somebody a parent calls in, are you going to corroborate it? Or are you just going to say, that was a warning, you're done? They're like, we'll make sure we do our due diligence. I'm like, okay, that's not trustworthy either. So make that decision. This is what I'm going to do. And immediately a couple days later, I text my baseball coach at BYU. And I'm like, Coach, you've been so good to me for so long. Can you help me? I need a job because I am going to get fired. He's like, yeah, let me call somebody. And mercifully, he calls up somebody who's connected, a former BYU baseball player, he runs his own business, and we're really successful. And I get an interview and they say, hey, yeah, we'd love to have you. And it was so comforting to me to know that there was something there. And so September in Provo High, I start teaching and I just have no personality. But here's why I was like, crap, I'm going to get fired, and why I finally pulled the trigger to quit. Because even though I put no effort in to connect to the kids, zero effort at all, zero effort, they still were coming into my office. They still were like, we love this guy requesting to be in my class. The same patterns were happening where I'm getting spied on by teachers, where they're feeling worried about kids requesting, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm like, it's going to happen. I can't see a kid hurting and not reach out in love. So my last ditch effort was reaching out to Dieter Uchtdorf, the only person on the 12 that I felt like I could trust, the only person I felt like would understand. I feel like he's millennials, like only hope, progressive Mormon. I know a lot like Holland, but Holland can be very firm. You know, I just heard his like taffy pulling patty cake people that leave the church. I'm like, he doesn't get it as much as I hope, you know, Uchtdorf would. And so I sent him an email and he didn't respond, but I knew of a person from my adult religion class whose grandma used to be Uchtdorf's secretary. And I said, can your grandma get me Uchtdorf's current secretary's information? And mercifully, I got the information. I drafted an email. I sent him his secretary this letter. I called. She called back and said, hey, this is Elder Uchtdorf's secretary. I'd love to talk to you. And so I said, hey, this is what's going on. I just need to get a hold of him. I'm a seminary teacher. I have these concerns. And she says, cool, I'll make sure he sees it. Can you send it on? And so I sent on the letter. She responds, this was a beautiful letter. Thank you so much. I put it on his desk. So I know for a fact that Dieter Uchtdorf read the letter I wrote to him, where I said, I understand the impropriety in sending you this email. I know that I should be talking to my stake president, to my supervisors, and that you are an extremely busy man. I also know the likelihood of you reading this email is slim. However, I have been wanting to write you for some time, and I felt I should take the chance. I hope you'll forgive me for this intrusion. So my name is Mark, and I'm a 29-year-old seminary teacher at Timpanogos High School in Orem. I'm a convert from Los Angeles, a BYU graduate, and the only member or active member in my family. My wife and I live in Utah Valley and just had our first miracle boy, a boy named Remy. We love him so much. I'm writing you in hopes that perhaps you could help me as I deal with the immense tension I feel between trying to balance my love for the gospel of Christ and those who feel completely marginalized by church culture, including myself. These kids who I teach at Timpanogos are so remarkable, but there are so many who are deciding to walk away from the church, and even a few who are deciding to end their lives due to different elements of our culture. This has been heartbreaking to me. Sadly, in my efforts to reach out and extend the warm welcome that I believe Christ would do, I have felt marginalized, ostracized, and even threatened by parents and others who believe I'm not teaching, quote, sound doctrine. I have prayed and studied and pondered for hours and hours, and I believe I am in harmony with God. I know this should be enough, but I often feel the need to walk away from this profession out of fear of losing my job. It is so hard to walk this path, and I am tired and wounded. So the reason I'm emailing you is to ask for your help, perhaps by having a chance to visit. I understand this is a pipe dream. Or email back another long shot to talk about how to navigate this delicate path. Because remember, I think that he's doing it. As stated at the beginning, I know this email will probably never reach you, and if it does, I'm sure there are many more things that are on your plate. I'm so sorry for this request, but I felt like you were someone who would listen to me without judgment and could help me walk the path the Savior would walk. Thank you for being a flashlight who points me and many, many others to the light switch that is Christ. And that was it. That was my last ditch. Like, Uchtdorf's my only hope, right? Like Obi-Wan Kenobi. He is the only one. I can't have this conversation with Quentin Cook. I can't have this talk with Bednar. I can't have this. I can't. They will not see. So a couple weeks later, I actually get a letter in the mail with church heading, and it's from Kim Clark, who's the commissioner of church education at the time. And by the way, I actually had no feelings of love or appreciation for Kim Clark. He was my wife's, he was the BYU Idaho president when she was there. Extremely cold. He reminds me of the Sith Lord kind of from Star Wars, where he's just very direct and strict and strong and no smiles. And, I felt so much coldness from him. And he was like Elder Bednar on steroids, right? And it's something, what's up with BYU Idaho? Just all these strict people. I don't understand why they're just promoting the strictest people there. But here's Kim Clark's response in July 12th, 2019. Dear Brother Oslund, Elder Dieter F. Uchtdorf requested that I respond to your email on his behalf, which to me, I was grateful that President Uchtdorf read it, or Elder Uchtdorf at the time read it, grateful that he saw it, and a little disheartened that he passed it on to somebody who I just knew was not going to answer my questions. Elder Kim Clark would have been probably the last person I would have requested. And I just said, I know that he's busy, so I wrote it off that way, but also I felt like, these guys aren't seeing this. Like a seer would know that I need him and not Elder Clark. He said, first of all, I want to thank you for loving your students and wanting to build their faith in the Savior and his restored gospel. It is tragic when even one of our Heavenly Father's children lose their way and wander away from his covenant path. It is our opportunity and responsibility to seek inspiration so that we can help them find answers to their questions. Was that what I was doing? And point them to the Savior and his teachings. And so I'm just like, there's so much disconnect. My thought was to supersede my area director and go the priesthood route and have Elder Uchtdorf say to Brother Linford and be like, nope, this guy, he is safe. You cannot fire him. That was my hope. And then I heard this. I'm like, oh, it's just a company form letter, almost. As for your question, I do not believe there needs to be a conflict between loving and welcoming all students and teaching the gospel with clarity. I think you can learn to be both a loving teacher who understands the student's sincere question and struggles and a teacher who follows the brethren with faith and optimism. In doing this, we follow our Savior. I'm like, when did the Savior follow the brethren? Is that a thing that happened in the New Testament? Anyway, of course, there is room in the seminary for teachers with different approaches and teaching styles. Is there? There's not. The Lord will use your strengths and experiences to bless others as you continue to reach out in love. I want to affirm some things about teaching, which I hope will be helpful. Despite differences in personalities, all effective seminary teachers have some things in common. They love the Lord and have faith. They teach with an understanding of the role of the Holy Ghost. Secondly, they have great confidence in the power of the word. They teach the scriptures and are unfailingly loyal to the brethren. We sustain as prophets, seers, and revelators. There we go. They know what the Lord's prophets are saying about current issues. I thought I knew that, and testify with sincere conviction of their teachings. Third, they love and trust their students. And when I'm like, he's writing this, I'm like, you don't know me, obviously, but I thought you were a seer and you were able to see how I loved my students. He said, they welcome questions and are not afraid to address sensitive issues, but they do it in a way that their faith is easy to recognize. They help students see the differences between sincere search for truth and the spirit of persistent doubting. This is in 2019. That phraseology must have been a phrase that they're talking about in church meetings. Persistent doubt. Elder Renlund gave his really crappy talk about the boat and, I went Evian in my boat and not I'm like, dude, you don't get doubt at all. Right? So these are conversations that they're having in the demonization that we now see perpetuated from Russell Nelson in April 2021 conference of lax learners and lazy disciples and lax learners. We see this conversation happening. In fact, wow, I totally forgot. One thing that may be helpful to use to review Elder Dale G. Renlund's talk from last year's June broadcast, which I literally didn't read, but there it is on the other side. And I'm like, these guys have no idea. That talk was horrible for doubters. My students hated it. I hated it. My friends hated it. You may also want to review another talk from Chad Webb. I know your question has been on his mind as we try to help students feel blah, blah, blah. And then this was the final straw for me where I'm like, these dudes straight up don't see anything. My last suggestion is to stay close to your principal and region director. I'm like, those guys that have been spying on me and ripping me apart. Your supervisor at SNI are trusted leaders who can help you try to implement these things on a practical and daily basis. For him as a first quorum of the 70 to say, we trust your leaders is now a stamp of approval saying everything they've done is what we would do ourselves. I'm like, that's it. Cool. Now immediately my faith says, you don't see the truth. You don't see the reality. You are not prophets. You're not seers. It falls apart right there. The fact that they think that these dudes, these leaders, these seminary leaders are approved and doing the right thing. I'm like, this is all crap. I already was wavering on prophets because of their past history. I was trying to do the progressive thing. Then them quoting these things that show how out of touch they are. I'm like, you guys are all frauds. And even Uchtdorf, who I still cared for, I was hurt that he didn't respond. And then the next conference, after he gets demoted, he says that we're unruly children, people who walk away. And I'm just like, there we go. So this guy who I trusted is now a company man again, talking bad about people. There we go. And that was the last straw. Uchtdorf was the last one. And I still appreciate him and I've listened to him over other people, and I wish that he was I wish he was the president of the church. If he had all power, maybe it would be different, but it all fell apart right there. He said, if you are sincerely trying to follow their counsel, you do not need to live in fear of losing your job. It is only when we feel we are the exception or we begin to feel that we are the only ones who understand our students and know better than our leaders how to save them, that we are open to methods and practices that could actually do more harm than good. And to that point, I did think I knew better than leaders. I did. And so he's right. But at the same time, I was actually saving kids and they weren't. So my results spoke for themselves. He says, there is safety in counsels from learning from others who have successfully walked this path. Make sure you stay close to them and all you do is transparent and appropriate both in and out of the classroom. He said, I hope what I've written will be helpful. Please know that you are loved and that your faithful service to the Lord and the wonderful young people of the rising generation is appreciated. I'm grateful for your question and the desire to bless students. As you continue to be teachable and prayerful, the Lord will help you know how to do this in a way that is pleasing to him. I get that letter. It's stirring on my mind. I get this job offer. I am learning that kids still like me, even though I don't try to like them back. And I just thought I can't do this. So I call up HR. Hey, after teaching one class, hey, I'm going to quit. I have a new job offer. Congratulations. Like, no, this is not something that I am happy about. They're like, oh, we're so sorry. And they're like, cool. we'll send your region director, you'll talk, you'll have kind of a debriefing, blah, blah, blah.
Did you consider waiting until they offered severance? Because by quitting, you don't get the severance. Is that right?
Yes, that's true. And I thought about it. I actually went to my therapist who, when I first met with him, told him all my stresses with seminary. He says, have you thought about quitting? And I'm like, nope. He's like, okay. And then this time I said, hey, I'm going to quit. He's like, have you thought about staying? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, you have impact. I'm like, I know. And the severance and all of that. It was kind of like an excommunication where for some reason I wanted to resign from this than have it taken from me. And largely because I think my insurance was on the line. I was worried, what would I do in the couple weeks? And I had a job offer. If I didn't have a job offer, I would have kept going.
I can see that.
So having that backup plan was like, that's it. I'm good. I'm safe. I'm going to make this work. The salary that I was going to get paid was equal to after teaching 6 years of seminary. So I'm like, okay, good. So it's a neutral jump financially.
Lateral move.
Exactly. Yep. And so, yes, I did consider it. And I knew it would have happened. It just would have happened. But I was going through so much emotional turmoil, trying to be that middle ground. And then I'm going through emotional turmoil. I felt like a shell of myself at Provo High. I just had no passion, no energy. I was miserable because I couldn't be me. I couldn't say what I wanted to say, and I had to be a company man, and I couldn't teach the lessons that I just disagreed with. But if I taught anything else, I would have been fired. And so that turmoil was just too much. Along with the job offer, I thought, let's go. And so I meet with my region director, who's just underneath the area director, and we ask questions. Hey, what was the problem? I'm like, the area director, he's the problem. And this. And he's like, would you like to have an exit interview with human resources? I said, absolutely. I am going to rip everything apart about how seminary's done. I'm going to call them out for how they treated my friend Laura. I'm going to do all of these things. And they're like, he says, okay, well, we don't want you in the classroom. You can take your vacation days. I had like 3 weeks vacation days. Take your vacation days. I didn't take them. I went to California and I got paid out for them. I'm like, you guys have $130 billion. I refuse to take vacation days. You guys can pay me up $500 for, all the pain you've caused me. And I'm waiting for the exit interview. And so I call up HR. They're like, oh, your region director said it's good. We don't need to have one. And I'm like, of course you don't. No feedback. Just this closed loop of, we don't want to hear it. We don't want to hear the feedback. And that was it. And I start my new job. And
okay, really quick, before we jump to the new job, let's just quickly debrief.
Please, thank you.
On the one hand, I want Robin Williams. I want Captain, my captain, to be successful. Yeah. I care about those kids, and I feel super sad that such a successful teacher that was reaching so many kids, that there wasn't a place made for you. I'm sad that you were ahead of your time, that the church will be, and, seminary, the average, there's like a bell curve, and the bell curves shift, and the bell curve will shift to where the majority of CES teachers are end up teaching the way you taught, but you were just on the cutting edge, and sometimes on the cutting edge you bleed, and you're kind of sacrificial like so many other people. And so for all those reasons, I feel super sad.
Thanks, John. You're just that alone. My friend Laura, she's been really wanting me to get this out. And, there's a Spanish word, descanso, right? Which is like this final cleansing. And I've been trying to find ways to do it. And as I've gone through this process with you and your empathy and your insights to my story, it has been the healing that I've needed for years. And so just even hearing somebody, instead of the judgment that I will eventually receive, hearing somebody say, I'm so sorry for what happened, and you were successful and good, it just feels like a balm for me. Thank you. Like I've just needed somebody to see the work I've been trying to do, and the harm that's been caused me, and the harm that's been caused my family, and be validated in that. So again, just that means just the world to me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course it's hard not to see myself in your story, because whether it was me teaching seminary where this almost same kind of situation happened where I had to quit, or when I taught elders quorum later and it just didn't work out, I had to come to this realization that the church wasn't ready. Even though it was likely to move in the direction, it was just too early. And then of course, moving forward to my excommunication, which you haven't had yet,
Yeah.
that's when I had all these ecclesiastical exchanges and the conflict. And even though, and this is what I was going to ask you as kind of like a different face to the I'm sorry, you know, there's a point where you really still think the church is true and you still think they're prophets, seers, and revelators, and you're acting in an idealistic way because you're expecting them to live up to what they say they are and what they teach. And so there's a point where it's natural to be engaging in them on face value for how they put themselves forward. Then there's a point where you kind of realize that this is just an organization and these are just men and this really isn't God's one true church. And they're really not led by God and they're just doing their best. You know, there's even a charitable spin on that.
Absolutely.
Which is they're just doing their best.
Absolutely.
And and we're all human and it's a broken system. And if the church goes away, they can't help people. So any organization, you know, the Open Stories Foundation is gonna protect itself as a main priority.
For sure.
Mormon Stories, because if Mormon Stories goes away, the Open Stories Foundation, you know, we can't help people. So there's kind of these two sides where once you cross over into that second spot, it's almost like Richard Rohr. When you're in first half of life, then it makes sense to engage the church on those literalistic terms. But once you cross over into second half of life, it's easy to sort of be caught in this, well, they're not living up, they're not really prophets, seers, and revelators, and they're not living up to their standards. But in your mind, you have already concluded that they're not
correct,
that they're not that. But it's hard to let that go because they're still saying that they're all those things. That's part of it. And people are getting hurt. And even if you know in some level of your brain that they're no longer led by God, you still kind of want them to do good and to live up to kind of the standard they're leading. And so on the one hand, I'm sad for you. On the other hand, I'm like, and this isn't to be disrespectful. On the other hand, I'm like, well, what did you expect?
Exactly.
They're not led by God. Uchtdorf is super busy. They're not, you know, they're just like, this is like, it's like that thing I knew, you know, that snake story that we heard growing up as Mormons. You knew who I was when you picked me up. Like once you knew that they weren't all those things, then of course if you don't toe the line, if you don't act in the way they need you to, they're going to cut you loose.
For sure.
And I'll just say that, you know, there's a lot in that letter that I think is actually true. I think there probably is flexibility and a diversity of teaching styles. But I think what's undeniable is that the Mormon Church values authority and structure and obedience above all else.
Absolutely.
And if you think about who, you know, I've often asked, why have we not have an apostle defect? And it's because they groom people starting from, you know, bishops and bishopric members and elders quorum presidents and seminary teachers. They're constantly grooming for company men, as you said, and they're constantly filtering out people that aren't putting the organization above the students or the members or themselves. And they're going to frame you as prideful.
For sure.
And that's what they're all saying about you. And maybe not all. Maybe some are like, I love that guy. I'm so sad he's gone. But the majority are just going to say, that's what happens when you get prideful. They're going to be as prideful. And ultimately, they're going to say he cared more about himself or his version of, you know, goodness in ways that ultimately don't strengthen the institution. And without the institution, we're all dead.
You're spot on.
So I'm not trying to invalidate you or, you know, neutralize the things I just said previously, but I'm just trying to kind of look at it objectively. And I'm guessing you feel compartmentalized.
Totally.
And conflicted too.
And I 100% agree. Like only with the distance that has come have I been able to see, like, as I was telling the story yesterday, just a couple pieces of that. And I was thinking, like, I get it. Like there's some things that you even mentioned, like, you know, my big thing was being told that, hey, we think Mark's going to have sex with a student and being concerned about that. Now their rationale for doing that was jealousy, but knowing what happens with Sam Young and seeing this come about, I'm like, yeah, I absolutely want every possible danger to be called out. The problem was how they did it. And so same thing with this, where I'm thinking, look, I absolutely agree that I was causing issues for the institution, but I was doing it because I thought prophets said that that's what we should do, right? Like I was using prophets to critique prophets.
Yeah.
But I absolutely agree with you. This was going to be the result. And a teacher that's friends with my friend basically said, like, this was always going to happen to Mark. Like, it sucks that this happened to him. And I agree. This was going to happen to me.
Yeah. The minute I bought my podcast microphone and released my first episode, I had a clear sense that excommunication was going to be the likely outcome. It took it took 10 years.
Yeah.
But I always kind of knew it.
Yeah.
And I had this conflict when I was fighting it towards the end where I'm like, wow, I knew this all along, and I'm acting outraged, and I'm acting upset, and I'm acting mistreated and shocked and surprised. The shock and surprise is genuine because you never want someone or something that you love to fulfill your worst nightmares. But at the same time, it's a little bit, I don't want to say duplicitous, but it's a little bit fraught because I always, at some level, I always knew I was going to be excommunicated.
100%. And like, I got into it, like into seminary because I loved the church and because I love what it did for me.
Yeah.
And at the very end, I realized that what I really loved was teenagers, and what I really loved was making sure that they were taken care of and they were healthy. And my belief was that Mormonism was net negative on their life, right? And so the hurt comes because I thought I was doing everything right by like I had all the justifications, but truthfully, I knew I was going against the institution. So it really was both, where I'm thinking.
And you know what happened? You knew what happens to people
Absolutely.
when they go against the institution.
At some point, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Where I start seeing, like, I saw you, I saw Kate, I saw Jeremy, I saw, and Bill Reel had just been excommunicated, and Sam Young's just about to start. So I'm like, I know this is a thing.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm seeing the trajectory, and I know also that they feel very protective of youth in particular because they're so susceptible.
That's all they care about.
Exactly.
That's pretty much all they care about.
Right.
I mean, tithe payers and youth.
yeah, that's it. And so from my point, what I was my sales pitch to them was, I'm keeping people in Mormonism. It's not the Mormonism that you like, but they're staying. If I'm not there, then they're walking away. And so that was my sales pitch. But truthfully, like, I understand their concern, because when you have a teacher saying, hey, I'm not sure about these teachings on gay marriage, when the church has made that their foundation, or hey, prophets have gotten things wrong, and they've made that their foundation, they're going to come for the jugular. It's the ego, right? Whenever we have our ego attacked personally, we lash out to protect it. Well, the church has an ego too. And whenever the church finds that ego, that fake self that's been created, attacked, what do? They lash out.
Yeah.
And the way of lashing out, they have lawyers, and they have excommunications, and they have disfellowship, and they have people that will distance themselves from you. And that is absolutely what ends up happening.
Yeah.
And so the hurt is real, because I see this community and this thing that I love. I still, like, I would be in a seminary class right now, but I would not say a word about doctrine. I love teenagers, like I want to help teenagers. I want them to be happy. But that's why this was going to happen. This was going to happen.
So we should come back to this at the end, but I'm just going to say right now, the biggest demand I've seen over the past 15 years in the ex-Mormon community, aside from kind of an ex-Mormon dating service, is ex-Mormon youth groups and ex-Mormon youth conferences. Yeah. So as you're getting your MSW,
and then I'll be in LCSW.
MSW, LCSW, maybe you will feel called to start creating kind of a ex-Mormon EFY.
I love that.
And ex-Mormon youth groups that can be financially sustainable by the parents that benefit. I mean, and you may not want to do that, but I'm telling you, there's a demand for that. Yeah. And I think there's a way to do it that's financially sustainable, because I believe people should get paid for adding value.
Yeah. And honestly, that idea had never hit me and so now we're obviously going to be brainstorming, because I think it's genius. Like, my hope moving forward is as I continue this MSW program, and just about a year left, I'll be seeing clients starting in August, and while still working, my employer is so good, and I love my employer, and I actually love the job that I'm in. Like, I really do. But I also love helping people. So I'll have that balance. My deep hope is that I will be able to be, this former non-Mormon, then super in Mormon, now former Mormon therapist that is able to reach out with kindness. I'm not going to force people. It's all about self-determination. But I want to be a resource, especially in Utah County.
Yeah.
Like we need people bad.
Belly of the beast.
Exactly. So like I'm part of like a Utah Valley Post-Mormons Facebook group.
UVPM.
Exactly. And so I'm going to message and be like, hey, in August, I'm seeing people, like, come see me. That's what I want to do with my life moving forward.
Yeah.
And so, I want to talk because that's, especially with youth. Like, I think my gift is look at my faith journey, and I'm going to help people walk through that too. But then youth in particular, there's something about them. We just connect in ways that I think are unique and special. So,
did you ever teach at EFY as a seminary teacher?
I applied, but then we went to Europe instead. Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, Europe was cool. So it was kind of worth it. And we found out we had a baby, like we were pregnant there. So that's a cool thing too.
Coldplay, dude.
Yeah. Dude, Coldplay. Unreal. Coldplay at Stade de France, like 80,000 people, man. Oh, that's a memory that I will cherish forever and ever and ever, So should we move on to what happens next?
Yeah. So you leave CES and I think it's worth just taking a second to explore, or at least lay out how terrifying it is to commit your life to CES, how limiting it is for many people, because you're one of many CES instructors that have or are reaching out to me who feel trapped, who have no idea what they're going to do. They did what the church said. They got married young. They had all these kids. Their wife never got graduate work, never did graduate work. Wife didn't develop a career. Now they've put 5, 10, 15 years. We had John and Brooke McClay on. Yeah. I'm not sure John McClay's ever really recovered from all that. Yep. But they put all this on the line, and then all of a sudden you're middle-aged without skills that you could have developed, without a resume that you could have developed. Yep. And to non-Mormon, companies, you're like this weird, you're what? You were a religious instructor for this weird church?
Yep.
Like, have you done anything else? Yep. So can you at least talk about what that's like from staring at joblessness?
Yeah, I mean, that feeling is so real. And I was fortunate that I was youngish, right? I mean, I was 29 when I quit. And I feel like I had some really great connections. And this is why I was so hesitant to, I don't want any of the people who I like, that I work with or former connections to feel like, hey, I don't like them, I don't appreciate them just because they're Mormon. That's not the case. But I did have a lot of really great connections and people who did care about me. And a lot of that was because of my Mormon ties. I was really afraid of speaking out because I didn't want them to distance themselves from me as an apostate, as somebody who's angry and vile, because I know that happens. So having, my main work experience as religion instructor is not going to fly for a company that's not run by Mormon people, right? Like I'm going to work for Microsoft. I'm going to go work for Adobe. They're going to see seminary instructor and they'll be like, cool. Well, we have this other guy that has an MBA and has 4, 5, 6 years of experience in anything business related. And so I felt very like, crap, do I do teaching? I have a master's in education, but like teaching history, like, I don't know. And then the same requirements and the same demands. So it absolutely feels, hopeless and scary. And I was fortunate enough to, be able to start another degree. I'm still young enough where I'll be, 32 when I graduate with my second master's. And so, it's still young. Like my life is still ahead of me. Somebody that's 40, 45, 50. I mean, do you just hold on? Do you just hold on? And honestly, for those people with their job on the line, I have so much more empathy. And I'm like, if you stay, I'm understanding. Other people that are like, well, it's harder for me because. But
wait, what would it be like for your mental health once you had gotten to that point where you had gotten your multiple letters, or even without the letters, you just didn't believe anymore? Yeah. Can you convey what it would be like to be teaching the youth things you don't believe, propping up an organization that you don't believe in? But you spending your life, years of your life, faking it and upholding an institution that you really don't believe in. What would that do to your...
It would destroy everything. I mean, it's water torture for me. I can't see a way
You said water torture?
Like waterboarding. Like it feels like it's just like drip, drip, drip for years and years and years, and you're living a lie. I'm such a believer on authenticity and vulnerability. I mean, I'm Brene Brown's like, one of her largest fans. And I just think to live a lie, it will destroy you. Like, how can you spend the rest of your life being somebody that you're not? And not just being somebody, but actively teaching it, and then being around people who teach this. And like, how do you have conversations at the lunch table with people who are so in? Like, I'm fortunate that my friends that I made my first year at Pleasant Grove are so cool. Like, they know, like, I'll, send them things about how I think conference is stupid, and they're validating and kind. Like, that's rare. That's not the normal in seminary, to have people that are still good to me after I've left. That is rare. And so the torture that people would feel, and the turmoil, and like, you have to get an ecclesiastical endorsement. I wasn't going to church. I had quit. I was in California, and my bishop texted me, "Hey, we haven't seen you in a while. We need you to see if you want your ecclesiastical endorsement." And I said, "I quit. I don't need that anymore." And he's like, "What?" And I'm like, I didn't respond. But like, dude, if you don't believe in you're paying 10%, if you don't believe in you're sitting 3 hours in church, or 2 hours now, or whatever else, or you have to do a calling, you have to do your ministering, like, that is death by 1,000 cuts. Over and over. Like, it would have absolutely destroyed me. By the time I quit, just feeling like a shell of myself, sad and angry and depressed and just purposeless. Like, Rachel looked at me and she was just like, "You need to be done," because I was so miserable.
You really do become a shell of a human when you're living inauthentically. And I think it does lead to suicidal ideation, along with depression and anxiety. Often it will, eating disorders, overeating, self-medicating. And I just want to say, if you are trapped in this situation, if you're a bishop, if you're a stake president, if you're, CES, reach out to me and I will find you confidential help. Email me at mormonstories@gmail.com. We will find you confidential help, because it can be fatal. I don't mean to be overly dramatic.
No, you're right.
Would you agree?
Oh, I had suicidal ideation for the first time in my life. Like we know from my life growing up, man, I'm just the happiest, giddiest kid. And just the crushingness of it all. Like, having my baby is what actually was a huge gift, where I'm like, Rachel, if I die, she gets paid out, man. But I think I want to see my kid grow up. I don't even like going to the office sometimes, because I just want to be around my kid. But those thoughts that came for the first time, and they're horrifying, man. Like,
this was during your time?
This was right as I was about to quit. Because I'm just like, what is my purpose on this earth? Like, and just being so beat up for so long, and it's just, yes, absolutely. Like, reach out, and like, I'm on Instagram or Facebook if you need. John's the best source, but if you need, like, I have experience, reach out here. Like, that feeling of loneliness, of suicidal ideation, of depression, of anxiety. Like, my mission trainer, he just got fired from seminary. I don't know all the details. I know that it was because he didn't transform. He conformed. But he's going through the same thing. He's like, "Man, I'm having thoughts I've never had before. Why are they doing this?" They say, "Hey, how's your family?" And then they fire me. Like, and he's like, "I don't have a job. Where do I go?" He has a BSW, a bachelor's in social work, but he can't do his master's, like, because he has other things he has to provide. Like, the destruction it wreaks on families, while they are simultaneously smiling and saying, "How's your family doing?" It is literally insidious. It is the most despicable of anything that could happen. And so for anyone that's struggling with this, including people who are just Mormons that feel trapped from family, my heart, like, if you want to leave and you feel like you can't for whatever reason, the weight you're feeling is so real. And my heart is just, it's with you. It is heavy, 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 heavy stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And not all abuse, going back to the Scientology metaphor, not all abuse is physical. And some psychological or emotional abuse can be worse than physical abuse.
And because there's the plausible deniability that allows them to gaslight you and say, "Oh, that was just you," or
"I love you."
Yeah, I love you. Oh, man.
The Lord wants this.
Yes.
Right?
Like, "Oh, thank you for loving me enough to cut me, like, and to hurt me." Like, dude, those are teachings that we perpetuate, that we're proud of.
Yeah.
And so you start thinking, like, I am the problem. I am insane. Like, my mom, who is, grown up in Mormon and you start thinking, well, if she's disowning me, it must be because I'm wrong, not because she's wrong or the church is wrong. And there's so much self-doubt and self-denial. And then if you do leave, then there is the betrayal. And then there's so many families that distance themselves. Like, here's my unique gift in this is I can go back to my former life.
Yeah.
So I'm transitioning.
You have a former identity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
Stephen Hassan talks a lot about that.
Yeah, the bite model, right?
Yeah. If you had a prior identity, it's a little, you have a little bit of an advantage over having never had your own kind of individually formed identity.
For sure. So like, as I'm coming up here and I'm listening, it's so stupid, but like the rap music that I felt like I couldn't, that is just now, it's just a part of it. Or my swearing, it's just part of it. Like this is just who I am now.
Yeah.
And like not wearing garments, that's a thing that I didn't do for 18 years of my life or 19 years of my life. Right. But people that have only ever been Mormon, who have only ever been in Utah and family have always been Mormon, pioneer stock, they don't have another life. I don't have to recreate something new out of whole cloth like the Book of Mormon, but I have to. I can go back. Somebody else has to create a brand new identity without knowing what on earth that looks like.
Yeah.
Proper boundaries with drinking. Like I knew that as a high school. I'm like, hey, if I drink, when and if I drink, I know what not to drink and how much to drink and when to do it.
Right.
Somebody else is like, I have no idea. This is all new for them. And so my heart just goes out for people that are having to create a new life, whereas I just had the gift of just being able to walk back into a former life and adapt, being, married and having a kid. But I'm becoming more of who I always should have been,
I love it.
Yeah. Thanks, John. So yeah, my heart goes out to you all. And for me, right when I quit, Bill Reel had like either just been excommunicated or was just about to be excommunicated. And so I started getting into podcasts. I was finally free. I could allow myself to not have to defend the church, right? Because that was still a part of, even if people like claimed I was just trying to tear it down, I wasn't. I was still trying to shift it to defend it. And then I started listening to podcasts. So I loved Bill because Bill, you know how he is. He's very direct, very cutting. I had all these seminary teachers with 1,000 degrees and they all thought they were smart and they all had all these apologetic answers for Book of Mormon. I need somebody to cut through the BS and be like, no, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. Ex-Mormon read it. I started seeing how people would critique things. I'm like, yes, I see it. I read the CES letter without having to do the Jim Bennett twist of it. And like I had read Jim Bennett's thing and he made the point on your podcast that it's the best source to keeping people in after reading the CES letter. And it helped me because he like made it lighthearted instead of this huge deal. And that helped. But then I reread the CES letter and I reread Jim Bennett's response and I'm like, oh, these aren't substantive. It's not good enough. Then I re-listened to the Paul Reeve training because I kept it for seminary. And then I was like, yes, I agree with this and the church is wrong. And then I started listening to Mormon Stories and I'd hear about the Swedish Rescue and I hear about the Second Anointing and I'd hear about the excommunications of yourself and so many others. And I'm like, this is horrifying. I listened to.
Was it scary to listen to Mormon Stories? Were you a little bit scared?
Yeah, off the bat, I'm like, what am I doing? Like I like, this is me. Like I'm an ex-Mormon now, like, is this really who I am? And not wanting to reveal that. And yeah, I'm like,
it's always weird. I only mention that because it's always weird when people fear me like I'm evil or dangerous. Yeah. And maybe I am, but Mormon Stories, I've just always tried to be balanced and to let people tell their stories. So it's weird the way people.
Yeah, it's the excommunication serving the purpose of, hey, you're evil, like, therefore you're wrong. And I know if teachers or people who are, in between are wondering about you and your call, like, you are one of the most empathetic people I've met. You genuinely care. Like, the fact that you've brought up things that I've thought about and you've used the word abused, you brought up Dead Poet Society, like, you're listening. You care. If you listen to the hundreds of thousands of hours of podcasts, over 1,400 episodes, you'll see that is the case. And yeah, you get direct, but it's because you care for people. Yeah. And so, as I started listening to
direct. That's a euphemism. That's a very nice way to say it. Sometimes I get testy, I get grouchy, I get angry.
Yeah, you get caffeinated John, but even caffeinated John, so caffeinated John is still so nice. You know what I mean? Like caffeinated Mark is like I started posting things on my Instagram that were very cutting, and then it ends up getting me in trouble with my stake president, and so
So Bill Reel, then Mormon Stories.
Yeah, and the transoceanic vessel, how to build a
Mormon Expression.
Mormon Expression.
John Larson.
Man, that one episode, it never crossed my mind. I've taught how many times the Book of Mormon, and all of a sudden I'm like,
summarize it.
It's literally impossible to have these barges that come across, the Jaredite barges. And by the way, the Jaredites aren't even real because the Tower of Babel isn't even real. And so if the Tower of Babel isn't real and the Jaredites aren't real, then they didn't have the stones, and then Joseph wouldn't have the stones. So how did he translate it? Like, I'm just like, holy crap. Things that I had taught for so long that are just exposed is like clear as day. And John Larson's ability to just make it all a joke and funny. And I'm listening to literally, he's like, look, we'll give a miracle. We'll give you grace for miracles. It is literally impossible for them to have built these barges. It could not have happened. Yeah. And for me, I'm like, so prophets were first gone. I'm like, prophets, you guys are wrong. I'll be merciful and willing to listen to you as some sort of authorities that are trying to help. That was still on the table. But in terms of you speak literally to God, you are a literal prophet. No, that gone, washed away. You aren't seers. You aren't revelating. What was the last revelation you got? Like, show me what the last revelation was. Like, it's just not there. And so that was gone. Then all of a sudden, faith starts being chipped away at the Book of Mormon, where I'm like, holy crap. And you start reading the anachronisms and you realize, well, the burden of proof is on the person making the claim. Meaning, if there's even the slightest crack, we saw this in the Netflix episode on Murder Among the Mormons, where they're looking for one tiny anachronism.
That's all it takes.
That's all it takes.
One.
And then boom, they found it, done. Everything Hoffman does is complete forgery. It's all broken. It's all wrong. The same thing I think applies for the Book of Mormon. You have one anachronism and your claim that it is the only truth, the closest to God, inerrant, all of these things falls apart. But it's not just that there's one, like tapirs or horses and all of that. That's not what that is. It starts getting to the point of it's like 80% wrong or plagiarized or copied and it came to pass, and like 20% good. The pinnacle of the Book of Mormon is Jesus giving the Sermon on the Mount. That's the pinnacle. That's the best part of the book, is a copied part from the Bible.
It's plagiarized.
Right? Like that, because that's what we teach. Wow, Jesus comes to the Americas. And what does he say? The same thing he freaking said in Matthew.
Verbatim with the same, almost verbatim
Yes.
with the same actual copied text from the version of the Bible that Joseph Smith conveniently has in his possession.
Yep, exactly.
With the errors that came across with it.
The italics, and and then it becomes nonstop, where it's just like, and then I hear David Bokovoy, and we talk about Deuteronomy, Isaiah. I'm like, holy crap! Like, this should not be in here just by the age of Isaiah. Why is this in the Book of Mormon? Therefore, he took it, and like you get view of the Hebrews, and it's just like, it's just so much. As I was driving, this is maybe fun. I was driving. I had just quit. We were going to LA to kind of rest and recuperate before I started my new job. And my brother-in-law sent me a podcast, the last podcast on the left. Have you heard their podcast?
Yeah.
On Mormonism.
Super funny.
Freaking hilarious.
Yeah. Language warning.
Yeah, exactly. Strong language, but my goodness, it was so good because they made light of these things that were supposed to be sacred. And their whole thing was, this is insane. Like, it's just insane. Seeing it from eyes that weren't Mormon again reminded me what I thought all the way back to when I was 16 years old and thinking Mormonism is a mess and it's a cult and it's weird. So it brought me all the way back to now I'm seeing it from a non-Mormon's eyes and thinking of how weird and strange this is. So now prophets are gone. Book of Mormon, which was already boring, is now I'm like, this is not the keystone. So now I'm thinking, well, what else is there? Like, what else do I care about? God? I'm like, he may or may not be there.
He wasn't so much there for you, or at least
exactly.
It's hard to see it.
Exactly. And so I'm like, look, if you were to ask me, do you believe in God? I'm like, I hope there's a God. John, I hope when I die, you and I meet with this loving, all-knowing being who loves gay people and I hope God is a black Southern woman, because my experience in North Carolina, those beautiful, wonderful black Southern women who fed me and called me baby and called me sweetie, that's what I imagine God to be. And I hope that God exists. But I can't say that I know. I can't. I hope that God exists. As for Jesus, I'm like, the idea of Jesus being a revolutionary preacher, somebody who upended systems of oppression, that message is meaningful to me. But I don't need to check in with that God. I don't need to worry about covenants with that God. Remember that realization I had of Jesus told people to leave the boat. And that's where I am. I'm leaving the boat. I followed Jesus right out of the church. You know what I'm saying? I think it was my commitment to Jesus that led me away from Mormonism. And I don't feel sad, because I don't feel like a God worth loving would be sad about where I'm at. Let's say I'm all wrong. say I'm completely wrong and everything I believe is wrong, and God really is Mormon, and God really does hate us, and we really do have to wear aprons when you get to the celestial kingdom, and all of those things. Handshakes. If that's God, I have no desire to be with that God. So at that point, the celestial kingdom, the terrestrial kingdom, who knows, outer darkness, that's going to be better for me than to be with an abusive, vindictive parent. Like having that realization takes away all the fear. And once you take away the fear, what's the point of Mormonism? Because I'm not afraid of that. It might happen. I'm so much more open now to being wrong and possibly being wrong. I would say, I don't know, or I have to research that because I was basically duped before. But at the same time, I'm also content with moving in this direction until, look, man, if I see an angel, that's the epitome of the worst thing in the Book of Mormon. Show me an angel and I'll believe. I'll believe. I'm not locked in. I'm not locked into this path. However, the evidence that's been presented to this point is not persuasive. In fact, it does the opposite. It's not just not persuasive. It is actively going against any faith. I can't logically have faith in this. I want to because it sounds beautiful. I want to because I want to be able to see my baby forever. I want to be able to see my wife forever. I want that. I have no assurance of that. And so I'm living my life now as if we die and that's it. And it forces me to be present and to enjoy all the highs and lows of being human. And man, I hope that we get more. But if we don't, I refuse to let the joy and the heartache of this life be passed by in the hopes of dreaming of my mansion above. I just won't do it anymore. And so I started having these realizations. And as I became aware of just how problematic the truth claims of Mormonism are, I felt like I needed to speak out authentically. And so I did a couple of Instagram lives where I told my students who I never told about any of this. We've done however many hours. None of them knew. And so I told it all. I read the letters to them and they were pissed off and they were mad. And then I was like, and by the way, did you guys know this problem and this problem and this problem? I started doing posts on my Instagram stories. Like I'm talking about like very sharp cutting. Like this is wrong. This is a fraud.
What's your Instagram account?
It's M Oslund, Oslund. And I'm private because I got in trouble because somebody found out and they didn't want it to be like going to work and coming back to my job. But follow me on Instagram and I'll add you and I will allow you to go in and just see all those stories that I posted that were extremely, I thought, cutting.
But you start speaking out. I mean, that's obviously,
Yep.
the church's worst nightmare.
Exactly.
Because all these students look up to you and they care about you. Yep. And now you're basically speaking out.
Yep.
And I can see why you would want to do that. I mean, it's so common for Mormons who leave the church who served missions to feel a lot of guilt and sadness for all the people they brought into the church now that they know the full picture and worry that the church can be harmful.
Yep.
I can imagine there's a multiplier there.
For sure. Like mercifully, none of my
former seminary
none of my converts that we had in North Carolina are active. So I'm free from that, but so 24 and families and they're all gone, but which is interesting. But yeah, the seminary guilt is real because so many people, as I started speaking out, were like, what's happening to you? Like I used to look up to you. And I do feel bad for the kids because they don't know what to do with this information. They see the information and instead of being able to digest it, it's so much easier to demonize. And, their parents are training to demonize and to look down. And so I definitely was saying these things and kids were reaching out and I think I started posting a lot in 2020. I had 2,100 followers and now I think I'm at like 1,600. So I've lost all of those. They're all my students that are just like gone. And many of them at the beginning were leaving messages like, you're so lost, you're anti-Mormon. And it's so hurtful because all I was trying to do was just practice what I preached, which was being authentic, sharing what I learned. And I get it. I understand why they would say that, but it hurts. That's what Mormonism does. Now there's the family and friends that are distancing themselves from you. I write this whole Twitter thread to clarify what happened in seminary. And I name names and I was very direct. Like I was bold. I was like, this is bull crap, all of it. Like,
what's your Twitter handle?
It's M Oslund 21.
Okay. And
I haven't been on it in a long time because I had to go private.
Sure.
And so I found a burner account and I have my own one. So, I don't get in trouble with my job or what have you. But I had this whole long thread and I called out seminary teachers and it went not with retweets, but with conversation, it was taking over the valley. And the reason I know that is because a friend of a friend said, hey, I was talking to these kids and they're like, do you know about this seminary teacher that just like went off on seminary? Like, and they're from Lehigh. And then somebody else in Provo was talking about it. And then like my friends heard about it. And then it was on ex-mormon Reddit. And then it was kind of like going around. And then I started getting calls from the people who I named who were like, we're so sorry. We didn't know we hurt you. I'm like, yes, you did. You absolutely knew that. The assistant area director who I named in that, he was like, I'm really sorry. I'm like, dude, you were Pontius Pilate washing your hands. You had all the authority. Sorry is never going to cut this. And so I'm starting to like burn bridges kind of with my former career. And my fear here in posting was losing my job again. My current non-church profession, because it's in Utah, we work with Mormon people, and importantly, my feelings of distaste even for a religion or individual people do not apply to the people who are Mormon who I like. I may not agree, but who cares? I don't agree with a lot of things people do, and I'm still their friends. My fear was that they were going to see this and be like, Mark hates us, or we can't trust him, or whatever. And I don't want that, because I want this like branded. If somebody's listened to all of this and is still like, whatever, I like Mormon people. I do. But I mean, I just couldn't be silent. And then 2020 comes around, and Black Lives Matter comes around, and Donald Trump and all of the rhetoric that's going along. And so I start speaking out politically. I think it's part of my charge as a social worker to advocate on behalf of marginalized communities. And so I'm speaking out about that, and I'm getting heat from my neighborhood, my Facebook. I just post little things like, I think when Donald Trump's Twitter was suspended, I just put like a wavy hand, and I had like 180 comments from that, of people being pissed, like, used to be a good Mormon, a faithful Mormon. Do you know that liberals can't go to heaven because Harold B. Lee said whatever? And I'm like, no. And so now I'm having that in my ward, and I'm just like, but I get it, but I refuse to be quiet. And I mainly refuse to be silenced. I don't like the feeling of being silenced. But let me tell you what's already happening for me right now. Sharing the story, getting it out, it has been this moment where I feel like, hey, I've purged. It's been heard, and it's going to be heard by thousands. And I'm like, people will know my story. You, John, have validated my pain. I've been seen, I've been heard, and I'm so honored, and it feels like healing's taking place. But here's there's two things I'm most worried about. I'm worried about my work saying, hey, like, you work with Mormon people, and they're going to see, on YouTube, a Mormon Stories podcast right away, and they're going to think bad of you. And to that, I would say, I really hope they listen to what I said. My hatred is not of people. The second fear is my stake presidency. As I was posting on Instagram, I got a text from my stake president. He's like, hey, how you doing? Oh, good. Nice to talk to you. Hey, can I talk to you? Can we come meet sometime soon? And I'm like, nope. I don't want to meet. Like, is this about church? Like, I don't really feel like going. I just need a break. He's like, that's awesome. No, it's about something else. Cool. Is it about the post I've had on Facebook? It's about something else. And so he's like, can I just call you? We don't have to meet. I'm like, okay. Because I don't want to give more time to the church. I'm going to put a suit on, and I'm going to go talk to my stake president. Why? And so on my way to like a company softball game, I call my stake president, and we talk, and he's like, I have been given a stack of papers from an Area 70 in the Utah Valley South area, who's been getting reports of what you're sharing on Instagram. And at that point, I'd known about the Strengthening Church Members Committee, and I'm thinking, who's following me, right? And they're reaching out, and he says, you can't keep posting this, or else we're going to have to think of consequences. And I continued to post. What I did was I removed him, and I went private. That was my way of I wasn't yet ready to be excommunicated, but I also wasn't ready to be quiet. And so I don't know what will happen. I am not going to church. I'm not planning on going to church. I don't know what my next steps will be in terms of speaking out. I definitely, as a therapist, and we know now with Natasha Helfer Parker, crossing this line of your professional obligations to speak out against harmful systems, perhaps that will get me in trouble, because I refuse to tell a client who's being hurt by Mormonism to stay in Mormonism. If they feel like it's hurting them or they want to leave, I am not going to hold them back, right? So I don't know exactly what's going to come, but I definitely can see a future where, I get a call from a stake president who I look up to and a member of our stake presidency who I, as a friend, and I genuinely like. I could see that coming. So I don't know what's going to come, but at this point I feel peaceful, because I need my truth heard and having it heard and sharing this and sharing the students and what they're struggling with and how they aren't liking Mormonism. That needs to be shared. And so for the Strengthening Church Members Committee that's listening to your podcast and listening to me speak, you guys are going to make these changes, and you better make the changes soon because you're losing kids. And you can deny it.
They know that.
They do. They do.
I think they're desperately trying to figure out what to do.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And so make the changes or lose a generation of kids and lose an entire millennial and Gen Z population. You will not have a church. You'll have a church in Africa and South America. And once they start figuring it out, then you're not going to have them either. And your church is going to shrink to nothing. Or you can adapt and kind of throw prophets under the bus and say, hey, we've gotten it wrong. Let's move forward. And if you do that, you'll have a church that will maybe grow a little bit more and be healthy. So that's where I am right now.
So there's still a lot of bullets on your page. I don't know if there are any other things you wanted to make sure and mention that were really important in your story. And then I do have some follow-up questions as well.
I mean, when I see all of these things, I've just been thinking about the hurt that's come to me, about the hate from people. I was actually on a Kwaku video. One of my former students was on there and was like, I've talked to you about this. Like my seminary teachers, he just lost his faith. He just went crazy. And I'm like, that's what people have branded me as. And it's been so hurtful. Like I get it, but it's super hurtful. And so I don't feel like I have any of that respect. People assumed that I wasn't faithful. And that was mean because I'm like, do you know how faithful I've been? Like, have you not heard my story? I don't think that prophets are bad people. I think that and some people would disagree and they think, no, they're all evil. I don't think they make six figures. They make upwards of, probably 200,000. They're getting travel. They're getting medical benefits. They're getting fame and popularity. But I think that they're convinced that this is the best way to get to heaven and will lie for the Lord and do all of those things that are necessary. So I don't think they're just purely evil, even though I think that they are frauds, right? When I hear Nelson announcing 20 temples, including in Yorba Linda, California, and I just think, what are you doing?
Is that near where you were?
Yeah, it's close to where we live. And our stakes are combining. We've dropped, my home ward has 3 new wards combined in it. And the sacrament meeting attendance is the same as when I was there in 2008. And so what are you doing this for? A seminary teacher said
well, the answer is temples are good for tithing.
Yep.
They're great. They're kind of like showcases for Mormonism in any local community. Yep. They've probably seen that it helps with the missionary work. It's like, hey, have you seen that beautiful building? That's ours. Yeah. It looks super nice. So for investigators, it's like, hey, wow, that's a beautiful building. Tell me more. Makes an association in their minds. And then it's a way to keep aging members busy and connected to the church and paying tithing. For people that really criticize the church for building a lot of temples, I mean, I can understand why someone who doesn't believe in the church would be critical of that. Yeah. I think the church wouldn't be doing it if it didn't make sense for the church. Sure. So they're doing it because it helps them.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it makes a ton of sense.
And shouldn't they help them?
Yeah, definitely. Right. That's the whole vision. And I've been thinking about the idea of taxing churches and how important I think that would be. The idea of non-taxing churches is to the good that you do, the public good offsets the money you would pay in taxes. And I just think, where's the public good? I think beautiful buildings have a role. I'm a humanities major. I love architecture. Everywhere we go, I'm always looking at cathedrals and other beautiful buildings, and Mormonism can have that. I don't think some of these ugly boxy temples are that, but I think about the Salt Lake Temple and I think that has a role. But it's just so hurtful to hear the rhetoric of Nelson and
which rhetoric?
The rhetoric of lax learners and lazy disciples. What is that? Are you just doubling down because you're afraid? Why?
Yeah, what I said this week was, why would a disciple of Christ add to the pain and suffering of people that he should be super empathetic with at this point?
Exactly, especially if you're the closest to God on the earth. Show me a verse where Jesus would have said anything close to that. It's just not there.
Well, he did say you generation of vipers.
Yeah, and he called that to the Pharisees, who I think the church is more like. He called that to the predominant culture. And so, like, when I taught Matthew 23, my whole lesson was, who are the Pharisees? Mormons are the Pharisees. Obviously, I totally forget to mention that, but that was a big deal. Like, you can't call out our culture. Yeah. And so, Jesus spoke very harshly, but it was always towards those in power. And if anyone's going to be getting a generation of vipers, it should be Russell Nelson and the rest of them. Right? Because they're the ones in power. And so, I'm getting to make peace with Mormonism in the sense that it's not going away no matter how much I would want it to or want it to change. And I'm not the one that's going to be able to do it, but there are so many. I have in-laws, on my own family. I have in-laws on Rachel's family, like her cousins, whose uncle or whose dad is a stake president, they're leaving the church. They're listening to Mormon stories. I have brothers-in-law that are sending me Mormon stories messages. I have Rachel's aunt and uncle that are being like, we met John DeLynn. And like, it's everywhere. Like it's just, the bleeding is just coming and coming and coming, and it's not going to stop. And things need to change dramatically for it to stop. And so speaking out about this is like, hey, listen, and they know it, but then they keep trying to hedge their bets. I think they're trying to keep the rich people that are paying tithing happy while minimizing the loss of millennials and Gen Z. And then once the rich older people die, they'll rechange so that millennials will feel comfortable. I think that's what they're holding on to. But yeah, it's just at this point, there is just nothing about Mormonism that is appealing to me in terms of its truth claims. It's not appealing. Yeah. And I think this is the tagline or the catch. I don't think this would have happened if it wasn't for seminary. I think seminary and my experience seeing the inner workings of the church and in what they want us to teach, I think that is exactly why I am where I am. I think if I'm just a convert and I move on and I go somewhere else, I think I might still be Mormon because I could be more lax. But seeing it all, trying to change it, realizing I can't. I'm done. There's no room for me. You don't want progressive Mormons. You say you do, but you don't. And so for all the progressive Mormons that are like, they want us, I'm like, my answer is they don't. Like, they want your butt and they want your tithing, but they really don't. Elder Holland and Elder Uchtdorf, who says there's room for all in the choir. There's not.
They want if you're quiet.
Yes.
If you're discreet, if you're not speaking out on social media, and if you have private conversations behind the scenes that are always faith affirming.
Correct.
But they want you quiet at church. Correct. And on social media.
Yeah, and we see that phrase so much. Like whenever I hear somebody now who's just like, "No, I'm not criticizing prophets," but like that, it's so sad for me where I hear these people having to protect their true nature. And I think that's the realization I'm having. My job isn't necessarily, there's other people that are doing it. You and Bill and Radio Free Mormon are the ones that are picking it apart, and they're doing it better with a bigger audience than me. My role is to the people that are presented in my life that are having gut reactions to things that are wrong. My role is to sit with them, to love them, and to allow them to trust their instinct. Because I think the story of my time in Mormonism was a denial of who I really was and what I was really thinking. And when I see that now with other people, I want to just be like, just trust your gut. I don't even need to maybe add to it. I just want to trust. I want you to trust yourself. You are so much bigger than what Mormonism offers. You are so much, your soul is bigger. Religion is this tiny box that is trying to trap a big, beautiful, wonderful soul. And I'm in the one belief I have more than anything else right now is the goodness of every human. I read a book by Greg Boyle called Tattoos on the Heart and a follow-up called Barking to the Choir, talking about gang members in LA who we always demonized growing up in wealthy suburbs with $1 million homes, and hearing their stories and seeing their pain and realizing the harm that they're causing is from generations of trauma. I thought, if these people are good people, so are every single person that's ever lived. The people that hurt me, the area directors, the principal, they are good at their core. So if they're
victims of the system.
And that realization, John, that realization that they're good, but they're victims of a system, where does my rage go? No longer to people, but to systems.
Yeah.
The system's the problem. Even David Benner, Uchtdorf, they are people, and I think they're worthy of love and respect. The system is the issue. Therefore, I want to tear down systems. And I feel like that's a role of social work. And that's why I want it so clear to people that I don't hate people. I don't. I feel like they're victims, and I don't want them perpetuating harmful systems, right? So that's, I think, a good snapshot of where I am. And like Rachel and I are happier than we've ever been. And Remy is doing so great, and it's just like this beautiful little 2-year-old with so much personality. And who knows what's going to happen when he turns 8 and he sees kids that are starting to get baptized. Dad, I want to do that. Like we'll have a real conversation about why we're not Mormon and why I don't think that's a good idea. But it's a really beautiful time in our life, and like, other than the pandemic and all of that, like, my work's going great. I have good friends. I feel very loved by my family, better than we've been in years. And
let me ask about that.
Yeah.
I don't want you to have to tell Rachel's story, but is there anything you can or have permission or her blessing to say about her faith journey?
Yeah,
or do you want to just let her?
No, she has no problem. So, I mean, she had some really real conversations with her family about how I was treated. Her big thing was like, man, and this was so humbling because, sometimes I can be really hard to live with, and seeing how defensive she was of what was happening to me in seminary was a huge deal for her.
Yeah.
Like look at this abuse. And because she sees who I'm saving, she sees who I'm helping. And that was a big deal. She already didn't like going to church. She already didn't like reading the scriptures. And then I start presenting some of this information to her, and it's like, yeah, that makes sense. And so, like, why would she's like, I already don't want to go. We have a baby, I'm exhausted, and now there's this, like, why would I do this? She is always going to be much more neutral and much more kind and not as direct as I am. But like she listens to Mormon Stories, she loves it. She loves Mormon Stories more than I love Mormon Stories.
Wait a minute.
Like she really does. Like, she loves hearing people's stories, and because sometimes I'm like, oh, these stories don't resonate with me. But Rachel's like, I love hearing them and feeling like I'm not alone. I love hearing people that grew up Mormon, and because that's like me. And like, they're starting to have texts with her sisters, right, about Mormon stories and about all these other things that are presented, and Mormon enlightenment and Waters of Mormon on Facebook. Like, and we're talking about returned missionaries. We're talking about people that are all married in the temple, faithful. Like, these are,
oh yeah,
you know what I mean? Like,
tipping point is coming.
Exactly.
I'm calling it the Mormon Spring. I just did an episode or a little 20-minute public service announcement where I called it that spring of 2021 is the Mormon Spring, where we're experiencing an enlightenment. Post-COVID, that's going to be probably a tipping point for the church.
It has to be. And I mean, I have so many students, like I mentioned earlier, that are like, church is boring, I'm not coming back. Being like, the church is rushing back to get back to meetings because they know, they're like, oh crap, people have gotten a taste of what it's like, that 1 week of state conference that nobody attends. And like, it's like that prolonged over a year, and they're like, uh-oh, get them back, and get fear and get shame back in, get them back because otherwise they're feeling too free, too liberated, too healthy. And even my super believing in-laws, my wonderful, amazing grandfather-in-law, who's a patriarch, is an amazing human. But he's like, I will tell you, it's been really good to just be doing Zoom church. Like, they love it.
Yeah.
And so this is happening even among believers. And then they'll be like, no, I love church. And that's whatever. They can do that. But my point is that it's happening. And Rachel definitely is more, she's more a believer in God and Jesus than I am. Whereas I would say I'm more agnostic, right? Leaning towards atheist at this point. Rachel's more of a believer. Rachel still has a hard time thinking that Joseph Smith was a fraud, even though she's like, well, there's evidence and she can't deny it. She's just, this is your upbringing, right? Joseph Smith is the prophet of the restoration. So that's that. But she did have a really cool conversation with her parents. We were visiting at their house they have in St. George, and Rachel was kind of telling what happened with seminary, how hurt she was, and her parents were being very kind. I love my in-laws with all my heart. Like, I wish everybody had in-laws as amazing as I do. Like, I love them. And they were kind of saying, hey, Rachel, yeah, this is hard. And Rachel basically said, I need you to be on my side. And they're like, okay, we'll be on your side. And that was really cool. And so it's just been, there's going to be more enlightenment. Again, Rachel's dad, his brother, has just recently like left the church and told him. And so they were kind of like, why'd you tell me? Like, we don't care. Like, we love you. And so it's just been, that's where she is. We did bless Remy, but it wasn't recorded, so he's not on the records of the church. So I'm like, sweet, like good for him. And Rachel always wanted that. We blessed him at home, and I was wearing a blue shirt and no tie, like just like little things. Yeah, exactly. Well, that was a thing in seminary. I was wearing like a blue shirt, and they're like, you can't wear that. And then after I get fired, they changed the policy. You can now wear blue shirts. You don't have to wear suit coats.
Yeah, of course.
Just so shady.
But it's not. It's about obedience. It's not about the content.
Yep. Oh, and that's what one of the teachers said that I called out on that Twitter thread, where he was like, blue shirt must not sustain the prophet then. And that type of those kind of digs, So yeah, that's where Rachel is. And again, we're very healthy and happy, and we're much more open about so much. And eventually, with the help of my therapist, I did tell her about all of, my past. And I was so worried that she was going to leave me, right? Because, wow, I had sex before. And Rachel just looked at me. She's like, Mark, I'll always love you. And I knew that. And I just wanted you to be honest with me. And so we are just really going through some good experiences and excited for the future. And like, people say you can't have joy outside the church, man. Like, I feel very contrary to that. Like, I feel like we're doing really well, other than the shame and guilt that is perpetuated by people still in the church. So, yeah.
So a couple questions. Yeah. One is, so you clearly, so on the one hand, as I think back to the beginning of your story, you had kind of an ideal life in some ways. No life is ideal, but
it was about as ideal as it could be.
But I mean, it sounded like you had loving, supportive parents and good socioeconomic status and good opportunities for education. And yet you felt like you wanted or needed the church. Yeah. And so I guess, okay, the first question I wanted to ask is, and we've already touched on this, but I just want to make it very explicit. Yeah. As a convert to the church, as somebody that took the missionary discussions, do you feel like you were offered informed consent when you joined the church?
No.
And if not, what were the things you would have wanted to know that maybe would have allowed you to make different decisions?
That's a great question. No, the answer is clearly no. And I am grateful I joined because I have Rachel and Remy from it. And yes, I did have the ideal. Truthfully, I have no problems saying I had the ideal life. I truly believe I am the most privileged of all people that have ever lived in terms of just my upbringing and life and talents and skills and socioeconomic status and all of those things. Like, so lucky. And I wish that I would have been told clearly about the temple. I wish I would have been told about the problems with Joseph Smith, polygamy, about the seer stone, about prophets getting things wrong. That was my biggest thing, because this is what the church is built on. And then you find out, wait, they were wrong about polygamy. They're wrong about women in the priesthood. They're wrong about black people in the priesthood and the temple. They're wrong about queer people. Like, I wish I would have known that. I wish I would have known about the church's finances and how we tithe money, even though, I think it was Joseph Fielding or somebody, Joseph F. Smith, says like, there will come a day when we won't need to tithe because we'll have tithe sufficient, there's just so much. I can't even, and the church is trying to do that now. I also wish that the church would apologize, because I would advertise that instead of just being like, no, we don't do that anymore, which is what I taught about polygamy. We don't do that anymore. I wish there would have been apologies for the lack of consent, for the coercion, for the manipulation, because now as a missionary coming in saying, hey, we want you to know our whole past, and we want you to know that we have statements from prophets apologizing and making reparations in whatever form to families. That now allows me to say, okay, here we go. We can now make a choice. I want them to say, this is a pipe dream, but the Book of Mormon, we can't take it literally. It has to be a figurative work.
History.
Yeah, we can't. It can't be. It's not factual history.
It's not.
It's just not.
Objective.
Exactly. And so saying, hey, you can read this book. It will give you strength. Even saying it will draw you close to God. That's totally fine. I'm okay with them saying that. But not that this is the most correct book, not that this is a real book, not that Lamanites are real, not that there are real Jaredites, not that Joseph Smith really dug it up, not that he saw Moroni, and please tell me, by the way, that he was a treasure digger, and tell me that he did all of these things, and all of a sudden he's like, how can I make money for my family that's poor? I guess I can turn this into a religion. Like, that's important. I don't know this. I'm like, Joseph Smith is just an innocent 14-year-old dumb farm boy, and he prays and sees God. and it's perfect. And then he has opposition. Like, no, I want to know about the printing press that Joseph Smith had destroyed when they talked about polygamy. And I want to know about Joseph Smith seeing multiple accounts of the first vision or writing down multiple accounts of the first vision. Like, how can I make a decision if you don't show me the fine print? None of those things are real decisions. Only until I'm 26, right? When my brain starts becoming actually formulated based on science, that's when your brain basically is an adult. That's when I started making all these realizations. And I think, well, what would have happened if I would have known that off the bat? And and then ultimately I wish that even if people do join Mormonism, which at this point seems baffling to me, which it was to you, like, why would you do this in 2008 during Prop 8? I wish that there would be more inclusion of families. I wish that that my non-LDS family could have been in the temple. Like, why? Why has Mormonism caused that pain to my family, man? And so I wish that. And then ultimately, I wish the missionaries left a message of, if you don't believe that this is true or there's somewhere else for you to go, we believe that you're going to be saved. We hope that there's something that you could take from what we taught you about charity, about service, about prayer, meditation, what have you, and take that and make yourself a better person, a better Christian, a better whatever you are. Like, that message to me is a message of informed consent, not you better get an answer, or if you did it, then you didn't get it right, or this is the only truth. Nope. I need that not dumbed down, but I need it more inclusive right off the bat for converts. Because a coerced message of this is the only truth or else is not one that you can make. It's made under duress, right? And it's made under a guise that it's going to be okay for you and your family, and it's just not.
Okay. Beautiful. Okay, follow up. Let's just say that, I know the Jehovah's Witnesses, I think they require at least a year of affiliation. And let's say that you had still met Faith. Faith in her family. Yep. The church was still meeting your social needs, but using the inoculation techniques, you did attend seminary and you were taught essay versions of all the controversies, polygamy, peepstones, Book of Abraham. You were taught the correlated contextualized version, because you can't expect the church to teach that it's all a fraud.
For sure.
Do you think that if you had been given more time and taught all those problems and taught about the blacks in the priesthood and Joseph's, the Nauvoo expositor and all that, do you think do you have any idea whether you would have just still, I had that big, strong feeling that one time and I love these people, and this option is giving me more meaning and purpose than being raised without anything. Do you even know whether that would have made a difference?
No, that's a good question. I mean, I definitely think so. The red alert that was going off in my mind when I went to the temple was so strong that I feel like if I would have known what was going on in the temple before I joined the church, I would have said, yep, that's a cult, and that's why I'm not joining, or that's why people say that. And so if I would have known that, I think that would have been a big key before I already got in, had a mission call, all of that.
So if you had seen YouTube videos of what goes on in the temple with the veils and the funny hats and the green aprons and the handshakes, and you would have just been creeped out.
I think I would have been I definitely don't think I would have gotten baptized as quick as I would have. I think I would have had to be let me, you're going to have to work through this with me, But the answer to the
Sounds like that might have been true for Rachel.
I would imagine so as well, right? Especially just the garments, and it's just, so I don't know. Here's the thing. I can tell you, I joined in the middle of Prop 8 while people in my ward were picketing, and that didn't sway me. And the answer I don't think is because I didn't matter to me. I think it was because I was still a 17-year-old kid. What did I know about anything? I was so ignorant because I was so privileged and my life was so good. I just cared about sports and friends and hooking up with girls and drinking. So I don't think it would have swayed me. I don't, because I don't think it would have registered how impactful that was. But at the same time, I think I would have heard it and been if they were that open, I would have turned to the missionaries and been hey, everybody's telling me this is a cult. And this sounds really culty. So again, I would have had to toss it back to them, and I'm sure they would have had answers that would have calmed me down or what have you. If I would have joined the church when I was 26, I think it would be different because I was more politically aware. I was more just aware of life and religion in general. I think things are different. I think as a 17-year-old, I didn't really have the capacity to really know any of the implications of what that meant because I didn't know about Prop 8. To me, that's like a huge deal for me now. And I'm not embarrassed because it didn't register. So that's how I'm guessing I would feel about the other ones also.
Yeah. Okay. This one's probably hard, probably an emotional question. There's a way to argue, like you said, you have Rachel, you have your son, Remy. And whatever benefits you got. So there's clearly going to be benefits by taking this path. I guess I want to ask you, in what ways do you feel like you were harmed by joining this church and or what regrets you have? And take your time.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you asked because I've been doing some real kind of emotional work on that recently, trying to understand, hey, why do I feel this way? Because I just felt like I was raging, on Instagram and realizing I'm only losing friends and losing followers, and this isn't having the effect that I want, and it makes me angry. And so I had to do some soul searching, like, why am I raging so much? And eventually I came to this realization of I've been harmed by Mormonism. And I had a trajectory because I had a trajectory in my life. I am an all-American athlete. I'm going to be a professional baseball player. I'm going to live in Los Angeles. I'm an Angelino at heart. Like, I'm misplaced here in Utah, and we're probably going to live here forever. But I am an Angelino, and I want to be by the beach, and I want to have all the friends and food and do the things that I did in LA. And I thought I was going to be a big freaking deal. Okay. And then I come up to Utah and I'm like, okay, I'll be a big deal here in Utah.
Big fish, little pond.
Exactly. I'm like, cool, I'll make it happen. And then I saw my trajectory kind of going up in seminary, and then it plateaued. I don't think I'll ever have in terms of number, the impact that I'll ever have like I did in seminary ever again. I'll be doing therapy work, and I'm so excited to do that. And I think it'll be deeper and meaningful. But I don't think it will be numbers. I don't think I'm going to be a public figure, right? Which was a dream of mine. I wanted to be Martin Luther King. I wanted to be a famous baseball player. I wanted to make an impact in the world. I wanted to be remembered. And then realizing I can't even be cool among how we in LA viewed the weird Mormons in Utah. I can't even be significant here. Like, that was a massive hit to my ego. And once I named it that, I was able to see it for what it was. And I realized, dude, the hurt is I gave up my baseball career. I harmed family relationships that are being repaired.
Which ones?
My immediate family, in terms of my mom, dad, brother, sister, all of them.
It harmed that?
Oh, for sure. Harmed my grandma and grandpa because they were.
How did it harm your relationship with your family?
Because they couldn't come to the temple. They saw me as judgmental. They saw me as angry. They saw me as this uptight, weird Mormon. And I was super judgmental. And my mom, who I think consistently has always just tried to look out for me, joining something she viewed as a cult, now I'm having to agree with her, but I've also had years and years of fighting against her. And she just being like so trusting of, okay, Mark, if you want to do it, but also being a mom's love and trying to be like, don't do this, My grandparents were hurt because they weren't at our temple wedding. All of my extended family was hurt. My relationship with Rachel was harmed because I was lying to her about my past. It was harmed because of how uptight I was about Mormonism and how it put strain on our relationship, that now we're finally actually on the same page. And it feels so good.
Patriarchy harms men and women.
Absolutely harms men and women. And it's just so toxic. And
marriages, yeah.
Yes, and it harms my relationships with the queer students that I had, because I could only love them to a point. And now I'm free to be an ally and open and have my pride flag flying, right? And so it harmed every relationship. It harmed my career. I gave up baseball for it. It harmed, we're here in Utah. BYU was not even, I almost didn't even know BYU existed.
Right.
Truthfully.
Yeah.
And then I'm at BYU and I haven't left Utah. And I was never going to ever be in Utah. That's what I said about Utah State. And so everything in my life is because of that decision. And now there's good and we can make good, and it has been good. But every consequence that has come to my life came because of Mormonism, including a miscarriage and infertility. Look, I wouldn't have been married to Rachel because we were 24. We were 22 when we got married. We were 24 when we started trying to have kids, 26 when we had a miscarriage. 29 when we had Remy. Like, I wouldn't have had any of that pain. And the pressure to try to have kids wouldn't have been there. And the pressure to fit into my ward. Like, I mean, it's endless. It feels like the harm that has been caused, you know? And I feel strong and I feel able, like, dude, I did hard things as an athlete and I feel like I can do hard things now. But that doesn't mean the harm and pain that I caused wasn't deep and wasn't real.
I think I want to at least give you a chance to speak to the hamster wheel of unworthiness, basically.
Dude, that, man.
To you. So to you.
Yeah.
You didn't mention that.
Yeah. I probably blocked it out, right? Because it's such a theme. I mean, I've had some amazing experiences in therapy that have healed that and made it a strength in my life, where I believe in my inherent goodness and I'm powerful and loved. But that happy kid, dude, that 17-year-old kid that was kind of a punk and did stupid things, but was so happy. And then just had to give it all up because I wasn't loved. It damaged me in ways that I'm still healing from. It damaged me in ways that like the fact that I felt guilty about watching YouTube videos that I liked, or saying swear words, or speaking too loudly, or listening to music. I had like subwoofers in my car and they were loud and I felt like that was a bad thing, or loud laughter. Like, man, everything about worth, like that constant hamster wheel, the constant feeling of never being good enough, it just grates on you and it wears on you. And it's so harmful. That was the most destructive thing that happened to me in my life from Mormonism. And my mom saw it. And I think that's why she was like, Mark, you're different. You're not happy. And I'm like, yes, I am. I am happy. You know what I mean? Like, I remember vividly driving to Chattanooga, Tennessee to visit my brother from Atlanta, Georgia, where they live now, and having that conversation and just being like, no, Mom, you're wrong. And even though I knew she was right. Like, man, I mean, thousands of dollars of therapy and all of that are, again, being twisted and made beautiful, the rose growing from the concrete. But that was just years and years and years of shame, and years and years and years of guilt, and years and years and years of just believing like I wasn't loved. Like, that's not a way to be happy. That's not a way to live a life that's so short and so fleeting, and then getting a cancer diagnosis and being like, crap, is this it? And I'm going to go to my grave feeling like I'm not good enough. Like, the toxicity of that is, in my opinion, the most harmful single thing that happened to me.
There are some that would say, Mormonism helps you get a good family. It teaches you good values. And they would say, hey, it's not like Scientology. You didn't get beat. You didn't get put in jail. You weren't forced to have abortions, so you really didn't have it that bad.
Yeah.
What would you say to that kind of argument?
Yeah, I mean, my heart, like, as I watch a lot of the documentaries on Scientology and I think about them sneaking out of cars and what it does, like, obviously, like, I would never say I would trade my experience for that. But the emotional damage that is provided, that is unseen, it makes it worse, because when I share, which is what I was doing on Instagram and Twitter, and sharing my hurt, because it's unseen, people then begin to say you are the problem, which adds hurt on hurt on hurt on hurt. Whereas most people, if a Scientologist, other than people in Scientology, right? So Leah Remini and Mike Rinder, and they leave and they speak about their truth, the whole world says, this is insane. The limited Scientologists are like, they're trying to absolutely ruin their lives. Like, I mean, physically coming to their home and threatening them, like, that's unacceptable. But for Mormonism, I'm sharing these truths, and what's going to happen is there's going to be people listening to this, I know this, that are going to be judging me and saying that didn't happen, or it was your fault, or you did this wrong, or you should have been better, or why did you believe that? And that message of not being affirming is deeply, deeply harmful. Deeply, deeply harmful. And I hate that. I hate that I have to then defend my harm and my hurt. I hate it. I hate that I can't just have the world. And that's why being on Mormon Stories, having your validation, and I know your listeners are going to validate this and say, me too, and I've been through it. That is healing. But the other people that are going to deny and denounce, man, that wound might almost be deeper than the problems that were caused in Scientology in some ways, right?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So how are things with your mom now?
Better. I'm going to actually be in LA next week. My grandma, she's getting really sick. She's had cancer for years, and I think it's just finally, her time. So we're going to be home in LA. My mom's there, and we're going to have some cool experiences. I think I'm going to tell her about my experience with Mormon Stories and say, Mom, I want you to listen. And I really have to own it. And that's hard because I don't like being wrong. But being like, Mom, you've always been right. And I'm so sorry for the harm that's been caused. I think that will be healing for her. The truth is my mom will always love me. She's proven it. And
there's religion right there.
Yeah, that is the joy of what religion should be. My mom is she's never given up on me, even though my decisions have hurt her. She's done everything she could to be supportive, even though she sees the hurt that I'm putting myself in, and I'm seeing a future where we're going to have a much better relationship. And we're still hard-headed, both of us, which makes it difficult when we disagree. But already now I'm seeing that bright future starting to come, which is really great.
So look into the camera and say something to your mom.
Mom, I love you. I'm sorry. You were right. And I just thank you for caring about me the way that I care for Remy. I get it now. And I just thanks for loving me and trusting me, even though you knew it was going to hurt me down the road. So thank you for giving me that space. I love you.
Yeah, because parents can make it worse. They can create the backfire effect by like being too antagonistic, and that pushes you too far back.
For sure. And like that's Mom, like our back and forth, and my dad will be more like, hey, kind of let Mark do his own thing, but my mom will fight back, and that's where I get my fire from. And so yeah, that did happen, but ultimately it was because of love. I see that clearly. Like, so thank you for loving me so much that you're trying to save me from harm. Yeah.
What would you say to any seminary students that are watching? It's a delicate thing because you don't want to like screw with their faith, harm their faith. If it's working for them, if they need it on some level, if it would be unsafe for them to leave it. Yeah. So you want to be thoughtful about that, but you also want to be truthful and try and undo any harm you may have done. For sure. When you were part of a broken system,
For sure. Yeah. And
so what do you say to your former students?
It's a great question. I have former students that are listening to this podcast that are excited about, they love you. They love the podcast. They've left the church. They're telling their parents. And so obviously I'm really proud of you. And they know, cause we've been messaging, and I'm here for you and the dozens of them that are walking away. For the ones that are still in, this is the hard one, because my experience, I think, is clear that this has been overwhelmingly harmful. There has been good. There's no question about that. I just see it being a net negative. But I'm learning now that I don't want to force people into things that they're not ready for. I think I was doing that in the summer of 2020, and that's not good. I don't want to keep doing that. I will say to people that are questioning, or not even questioning, questions are still good. Like, I taught that and I still believe it. Keep asking questions. Don't be worried about sources. Be worried about truth. Find truth.
Don't be worried about sources?
Yeah, like going to the church website instead of Mormon Think, for example.
Oh, so just find truth wherever it is.
Find truth. Yep. Yeah. The quest is for truth, not getting it from a source that has already kind of made it.
Don't discount certain sources. Because the truth is, who tells the most accurate Mormon church history? It's Mormon Think.
Yep.
It's CES Letter.
Yep.
It's people who've come on Mormon Stories. It's Fawn Brody.
Yep.
Maybe Richard Bushman, but not as good as Fawn Brody.
Exactly.
And those are the most trustworthy books.
Yes.
And it's not saints, and it's not the essays, and it's certainly not the church.
Yep.
So seek out the best books.
Yep, exactly. Right? And that's right there in scripture. And truly, like, we should be trusting authorities. And so don't be afraid of that. Like, find the truth. And then I think the most important single message, this has really been on my heart the last couple of weeks, is trust your gut. Trust your gut. You know what you don't like. You know what makes you feel uncomfortable. You know when something's not okay. You know you don't want to meet with bishops and talk about sexual things. You know that you don't want to feel guilty about not going to church. You know that
LGBT people don't choose to be gay.
Exactly.
You know it all. You know that dark skin is never a curse for wickedness. You know?
Yep. They know it all.
You know that polygamy is wrong.
Yep.
And that lying about polygamy is wrong.
Yep.
Right?
They know it all.
And that honestly, well, I mean, I don't want to stack the deck, but I'm not so sure angels deliver golden plates. Right? I'm not so sure about that.
And I don't think they are either. And they know like, hey, you're not getting answers from God. And so instead of betraying yourself, trust yourself. That has been the message of, I've just seen so many people betraying themselves to make Mormonism work. And my message is stop doing it.
Don't betray yourself. That's the most important message.
Yep. That's it.
And Christ kind of said the kingdom of God is within.
So did Coldplay.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. Who? Coldplay did. Heaven is inside.
What's the song?
Every teardrop is a waterfall. Oh. And I'm literally crying in Paris, like, yeah, heaven is inside. Like, and so like, yep.
Don't abandon yourself.
Don't. My friend Laura. No, my friend Laura is a great example of this. She's also not going to church, and she's currently having seminary teachers reaching out and trying to rescue. And she's like,
she's coming on Mormon Stories.
Yeah, exactly. She had the official invite. So as soon as I'm done, I'm texting her and saying, hey, you're coming on. Exactly.
Laura, you're next.
And so, like, we've had a ton of talks, and she has been, I think, she's been huge for me and having that support. And I'm just so grateful. Her and Rachel have been like my two people. And then my other friend who's still teaching seminary have just been like the three people in my life. But Laura's story, I think has been this huge realization where my friend Laura, who has been making herself small and not who she's always intended to be. She is small. She's not a tall person. She's thin, and she is a big soul that has constantly put herself in a box. And watching her find her inner power. She told of a story, and I'm sure she'll tell this when she comes on, but she went to the sequoias and she was expecting to feel really tiny among these giant sequoias in California. And she felt, I am like this. And so seeing my friend set boundaries with her mom, stand up for herself, say no to things that don't make her happy. I haven't forced Laura into things she hasn't wanted. I've watched her become who she's always wanted to be. And that's the message. Trust yourself. Don't put yourself in a box. You're too big to make your life so small. And that's the message I want to share with everyone, and especially my students. If Mormonism works for you, okay. I can debate you on why I think it works and all of that, but I don't need to. If it's not working for you, don't force it to fit. Don't force it.
So for the Strengthening the Church Members Committee that are watching, spend 1 minute telling the church what you think it should do to make things right. Just a minute. Keep it.
Yeah. Here's my best advice. Create a millennial council, a millennial and Gen Z council, headed by a member of the First Presidency and the Quorum of the 12. Hear what they're actually saying. Involve people who are converts, who are not Mormon, who have left the church. Ask them.
LGBT people.
LGBT,
color,
everybody.
Women.
Yep. The most diverse thing.
Transgender people.
Everybody. People who have been harmed, people who have excommunicated people. Put them all on a thing. Ask them questions. Listen to their answers. Do what they say. Because for me, it was, I am where I am because I listened to people, like the way I promised Jesus I would when I was baptized. And I refused to ever, ever, ever harm somebody when they said it was harming them. So listen. You already know the answers.
Right? Do no harm.
Do no harm. You know the answers. But if you need more affirmation, ask the millennials who are bleeding from your church, and then do what they say.
All right. And the last question I have for you today, other than to give you a chance to give any final words, is someday, Remy has no idea.
Yeah.
And even he won't have any idea about the significance of the decisions you guys have made because he won't have been raised in the church. So someday, hopefully he'll watch this whole interview. Yeah. And I just want you to have a chance to talk to Remy when he's, know,
man, I feel like the emotions that I have are rare. I don't often cry, but I do when that love, Remy, I love you. I guess I'm just going to say what my dad said to me, that you won't know how much we love you until you hold your kid in your arms. And we only want you to be happy for your whole life. No matter what or who you are, we just want you to be happy. And the kid you are right now at 2 years old and the joy you have, like I will do anything to make sure you have that smile, that joy every day. I love you with all my heart. You are the greatest gift in our life. And I hope you just find so much joy in your life, buddy. We love you.
What about his worth?
Your worth is eternal. And any message that ever makes you feel like you're not worthy, run far, 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 far from that. The way that I look at you, the way I feel for you is the way you should always feel. And any message that ever makes you doubt what I'm expressing to you right now about your love and worth, it is a lie. It is not true. Do not listen to that message, buddy. You are perfect and you will always be perfect and you are so, so, so good. And so never, ever question that.
Beautiful.
Thanks, John.
All right. So we've got like 2 minutes and the card's going to run out of space. So any final words to everyone, before we end?
Thanks for listening. It's an honor. Thanks for sharing my pain, my hurt. You can reach out to me on Instagram or Facebook. My Instagram's Oslund, Oslund. I'm excited to be working with clients in Utah Valley, specifically, hopefully people going through faith transition. Reach out to me. I'll be on the Utah Valley Post-Mormons site and reach out to me. I'd love to work with you or your teenagers. And just thanks for listening. Thanks for your goodness. And my heart is with you too. I'm proud of all of you and grateful for you listening.
Also, Rachel, thank you for supporting Mark, because as I know with Margie, this is a team effort, even if Mark's the face.
Yeah.
And then, Mark, I just want to challenge one thing. Coming back to something I referred to earlier, I don't know that it's a foregone conclusion that your days of highest exposure to youth and to others are over. And as someone who wondered as someone who often wondered, am I ever going to make an impact? Am I ever going to reach my potential? I can just say you can turn this pain and this difficulty into a huge gift, and you can make lemonade from lemons, but more importantly, you can take pain and turn it into a huge blessing and gift, not just for yourself, but for others. And so don't count yourself out for that big influence down the line, because there's so much opportunity, whether it's ex-Mormon EFY, whether it's youth groups, secular youth groups, not just ex-Mormon, secular youth groups, community building, mental health, social media. Sky's the limit. So maybe all of this works to you actually achieving that potential. Just in ways you don't know yet. So I just want to say, don't give up on that.
Thanks, John. And I'm open to anything that life throws at me, and I'm certainly willing. I think I've made peace with it not happening, but if we come up with an idea and we have an amazing conference for post-Mormon EFY kids, I will do it with my jump in both feet, and I'm ready for it too. So thank you. I am so appreciative.
All right. All right, everyone. Love you. Thank you so much for staying with us today. I'm running out of steam. Donate to mormonstories.org. If you want to see this content continue, click on the donate button at the top, become a monthly donor. Less than 1 out of 1,000 people donate, and we're losing donors every year, and so we got to replace them to keep it going. Thanks for your support. Thanks. Please spread the love, share this everywhere. But most importantly, Mark and Rachel, thank you so much for your story. Thanks for your courage, speaking up. You're going to help a lot of people. And on behalf of Mormon Stories, all our listeners, this community, we love you. We're grateful for you. And we are going to expect good and big things from you.
Thanks, John. I appreciate all of you. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Kerr.
Yep.